Halo guys, kita bertemu lagi setelah berapa? 30 minggu aku tinggal ya, maaf ya. Lama. Di tempatmu hujan gak, Saks? Tempatku hujan gede anjir. Tapi hujannya kayak nggak berhenti. Berhenti gede gitu. BTW ini tadi aku udah ngecekin traktirnya ya. Tadi dulu aku play lagi nih. Udah bener harusnya coba. Tadi dari si Kronos nih. Nah, bisa. Thank you Kronos. Halo Nipi. Bikin gede dari pagi. Lu nggak berhenti gak, Kak? Tadi aku sempat berhenti beli makan sih. Aku emang ngerasa dari pagi tuh hawanya dingin mulu sih, tapi dari pagi tuh aku nggak keluar. Siang tuh sempat berhenti. Terus iya, thank you Kronos. Sore hujan lagi terus aku mengantuk. Terus aku merem, tahu udah gelap. Terus aku beli makan. Terus hujan lagi. Keren. Kayak ini dari Nipi ini next. Oh iya, terima kasih. Thank you Nipi. Senitobinnya. Sama kok, kadang berhenti, kadang Nem sudah cukup Nem, kamu sudah mengirim berapa hari ini? Nepe Anjir, back to back. Thank you Nepe. Thank you. Semoga makin panjang orang panjang. Nih, ada orang ngetes pakai 5.
Traktir 5 chips keripik tes.
Why you mean tes menggunakan 5 chips? Kacing.
Niviana mentraktir 1 chips keripik kak ara-araka.
Gak mau, kemarin udah ya. Karena udah ada itunya, udah ada soundboard voice note ya. Sudah direkam ya. Tidak ada reka ulang, sudah cukup. Why not? No. Sama lu, Saks. Kita lanjut ya. Kemarin kan sampai ini nih, sampai jam 10 malam ya. Kabarnya kan kalau jam malam tuh sudah beda master. Apakah kita akan bertemu dengan Beatrice malam ini? Maria was repeatedly barraged with questions by Aunt Rosa and the other parents, and became increasingly ill-tempered when they refused to believe her. Stream di sini lebih lancar dari di sebelah. Maksudnya lancar gimana tuh? If kids try to butt in, they will probably ignore us. Our parents were all stirred up, firing back and forth about the gold and the distributions of the assets, and completely forgetting that we were even there. I already guessed they'd been talking like this in the shadows, but I hadn't thought they would be so blunt. It gave all of us kids a considerable shock. From what we could overhear, all the parents wanted more money as soon as possible. Tadi tiap ku klik live-nya buffer mulu, di sini aman. Loh, kenapa ya? Settingannya sama padahal. Somehow mungkin stream key ngaruh kali ya. Gak tahu sih, aku kurang paham. Tapi waktu itu kasus Ferin tuh kan dia emang main satu channel doang ya. Terus dia nyoba, aku nggak tahu dia settingannya tuh connect account atau pakai stream key, tapi intinya dia setelah nyoba-nyoba itu tuh ada yang berubah dari streamnya, cuman gara-gara stream key-nya doang. Jadi sebelum diubah tuh eh resolusinya mentok di 720 apa ya, advance ini kan udah 1080 ya, 1080. Kalau dia tuh mentok di 720 waktu itu, tapi habis ganti stream key baru muncul yang HD-nya. Tuh hujan game, ini hujan game. Halo Elan, malam ya guys. Buat kalian yang mengantuk, anggap saja ini bad story ya. Ini udah tadi. Back and forth about grandfather's inheritance. Back and forth about the distribution of the gold if it was found. About advance payment and cash. It was so despicable I could hardly bear to watch, even though one of them was my father. It looked like Jessica felt the same way. We left our seats without being asked to and went to hang out somewhere well away from our parents. Semua you mean ini lagi hujan disuruh.
なるほどな。じいさまが飯の席にも顔を出したくない理由がよーくわかったよ。うちの親たちにはすっかり幻滅だぜ。
Yep.
金だの遺産だの。
Yep.
よくもまああそこまで大っぴらに。
俺の場合はクソ親父に幻滅しきってるからよ。
Gary? Ah, Gary.
Ini apaan sih?
Gary. Gary.
Ini konteks yang kau janjikan tadi ya?
Gary. Gary. Gary.
Gimana apa ini, Saks?
Huh? Gary. Gary. Gary.
Gary.
Gary. Oh, Gary. Gary?
Oke, Gary.
Huh? Gary? Gary, what? Gary! Woohoo! Gary! Gary!
Aku berasa
Gary?
dengerin ini
Gary?
lah, apa?
Gary!
Voice line The Sims ya. Thank you, Saks, sudah memberikan konteks. Game apa itu, Saks? Aku tidak akan meninggalkan stream. Iya, nggak apa-apa. Iya. Aku tidak akan berkomentar nih, Pi. Di Sambi pun tidak apa. Fallout 3. Oh, I see.
これ以上評価の下がりようがないぜ。
そんなの私だって同じだぜ。しかし今夜のには呆れたぜ。心底呆れたぜ。
Which freaking... Jessica looked down at the floor, irritated. She was always talking about how bad her parents were, but maybe she hadn't really felt that way deep inside. The depth of Jessica's shock made that clear.
未成年の君たちはご両親に養育してもらってるからわからないだろうけど、
George si paling dewasa.
お金を得るというのは単純な綺麗事じゃないよ。未成年である今にそれを理解しろとは言わない。でもご両親なりに何かの努力をしていることだけは認めてあげてほしいな。
やれ、ジョージの兄貴は人間ができてるぜ。
ジョージ兄さんは社会人になってバリバリ働いてるけどよ、金とか財産とかそういう話になったらうちの親父たちみたいに強欲むき出しのハゲタカになれるってのかよ。
Well...
自分だけの話だったらそんなことはしたくないよ。でも家族や社員、部下やその家族の生活を背負ったら戦わなければならない時もあるかもしれない。
Tapi kayaknya buat case orang tua kalian tuh mereka lebih memikirkan diri mereka sendiri gak sih?
私はそんな戦い嫌だぜ。小さまの遺産がどうのこうのなんて話、ヘドが出るぜ。
Jessica pretended to speak violently. That harsh reaction made the depths of her pain very clear.
もう、この話はやめようぜ。じいさまの隠し黄金がどうのこうの、財産だ遺産だって話は、親たちの問題で俺たちの問題じゃないさ。
僕もせめて気を利かせて親たちの話し合いを邪魔しないのが子供の務めだと思うね。
なんだか面白くねえぜ。
Everyone knows the praise. Adults are filthy. But we had now seen that for ourselves, and that really did give us a considerable shock. George Aniki was now pretty much an adult, and I'd already been disillusioned with my dad, so the shock wasn't that big for us. But Jessica seemed to be taking it hard. Apparently, she would receive a bigger blow than I would thought. She always talked badly about her parents, but it looks like she hadn't changed at all on the inside. Even though she's still a pure-hearted, delicate person who can't adopt others. I'm sure she respected her parents as much as anyone else does. And then her parents started raging about going, money, inheritance, my money, right in front of all of the other parents and the children. It's no surprise she received such a shock from hearing that.
ジェシカちゃん、どうかお父さんとお母さんのことを嫌いにならないで。理解しろとまでは言わないから、せめてどうか嫌いにならないであげて。
分かってるよ。少し放っておいてくれよ。
6 years ago, I would have kept taunting Jessica even after she got all dejected. But I guess I really have grown under the last 6 years. I realized that it would be better to leave Jessica alone right now. Jessica suddenly looked away sulkily and left the parlor. She probably wanted to be alone for a while. I could do nothing but wordlessly watch her back as she left.
そういえば、マリアちゃんはどこに行ったんだろう。
多分、まだ肖像画の前でいじけてるんだろうぜ。
Maria truly looked up to wages, and she would expect that coming in direct contact with Beatrice and receiving the letter as a proof would surprise everyone and make them happy. However, the adults had doubted its authenticity, to roughly bombarding Maria with questions and refusing to accept her story. Nih, kamu yang bilang Maria metong tuh kamu bercanda atau beneran, Saks? Even for me, it wasn't hard to imagine how much that must have hurt Maria. We couldn't speak to Maria or Jessica. In the end, George, Aniki, and I just abandoned ourselves to the sound of the falling rain in the dark night.
台風はどんな感じなんだろうね。ニュースをやってないかな。
George Aniki started walking over to the corner of the parlor where the television was. He hadn't called me over, and I really couldn't have cared less where the typhoon was on the sea now. So without going over to the television, I loitered around the window.
そんなに風は出てなさそうだけど、海の上はひどいのかしらね。天気予報では暴風警報も聞いてたんだけど。
キリエさんか。
Sejauh ini yang paling apa ya, nggak ikut campur, yang paling apa ya, paling reasonable tuh si Kirie sama Rosa sih, meskipun Rosa itu memukul anaknya.
大人たちの積もる話はどんな感じなんすか？
Mungkin karena si Kiria juga kecewa kali ya, si Rudolf tuh nggak ngomong-ngomong soal masalah keuangannya ke dia, padahal mereka kan sudah menjadi suami istri. She seemed to catch the sarcasm. Kiria-san shrugged.
この胃の痛くなる話は徹夜で続くのかしら。嫌になるわ。
まあ、せいぜいよろしく。じいさまの財産分配について、ハゲタカごっこをお楽しみくださいってんだ。最低の気分だ。
それに関してはバトラ君みたいに席が外せるなら、私もそうしたいわ。
Nah,
でもそうもいかない。たとえ発言権がなくてもね。パートナーも大変よ。
Kiria-san took a deep breath, smiling bitterly. That's right, they probably wouldn't let Kiria-san speak, since he's only married into the family. Oh, still, as dad's partner, she had no choice but to stay by his side, blah blah blah, nggak kebaca tadi. She's probably had to bear the full burden of this mental pressure much more than me. I wasn't going to apologize, but realizing that I'd spoken too harshly, I cut the sarcasm for the time being.
どんな感じなんすか？相変わらず、謎の魔女ベアトリーチェの話題で持ちきりですか？
まあね。あの人たちは、おじいさまが亡くなった時の遺産分配について、兄弟4人で話をまとめようと、ずっと密約を重ねてきた。そこへ未知の5人目が現れて、話をややこしくしようっていうんだから、穏便な話のわけもないわ。互いを罵り合ったり、かと思えば共闘しようってことになったり。夏日姉さんでなくても頭痛がしてくるところよ。
On the one hand, they all want a larger portion than the other siblings, so they are all rivals. Lah, sebelumnya nih munafik semua ya kalau dipikir-pikir, mengingat si ketiga adiknya ini sebelumnya bekerja sama gitu, punya porsi yang sesuai, tapi sekarang malah jadi pengen punya porsi yang lebih gede. Anjing ya, keluarga cemara guys. But on the other hand, they don't want 1 yen to be snatched up by anyone other than the siblings, so they are also all allies. Oh iya, kan treasure huntingnya berlaku buat ini ya, di luar keluarganya juga. I hadn't been told the details, but the siblings were apparently discussing how to protect their shares under various situations, setting up case fire agreements and rules to prevent anyone from getting an unfair advantage, even preparing to resort to legal action if absolutely necessary. That they would go this far to preserve their shares was so beyond disgusting that you just had to acknowledge their resilience.
ってことは、
segalanya
さしずめ。
Kayak yang di game tadi aja tuh kan ada paint, ada lukisan yang tentang, kalau nggak salah ya. Tadi tuh sekilas aku baca tentang seorang perempuan yang membunuh suaminya apa ya, gara-gara warisan gitu.
ベアトリーチェはじいさまからの資格ってとこですかね。自分抜きで遺産の分配なんて話を勝手に進めてた息子たちに一泡吹かせたかったんだろうぜ。
Insane.
何者かしらね、ベアトリーチェって。自称してることが全て本当なら、今日まで誰にも知られずにいた謎の人物で、しかもおじいさまの隠し黄金の存在を知っていて、その上当主の指輪まで委ねられている。相当に信頼された人物ね。
さすがに大きにまたがった魔女だとは思わないっすけど。
Kerasnya your kakek. But obviously I don't think she's a witch riding around on a broom.
でも魔女と呼ぶに値する怪人物であることは間違いないっすね。
マリアちゃんがそのあたりのことを詳しく話してくれればいいのだけど、みんな小さい子にがっつきすぎだわ。すっかり怯えてしまって、聞けるものも聞けなくなってしまった。あの人たち、北風と太陽とか読んだことないのかしら。
確かなのは、マリアがベアトリーチェと名乗る人物から手紙を受け取ったこと。自分で現れて直接話せばいいものを、手紙を託して今もどこかに身を潜めているっていう、シャイな怪人物ですけどね。
Entrusting Maria with a letter and hiding away even now when she could have just appeared and talked to us directly. Please muncul. Aku
ねえ、
nak
バト
tengok.
ル君。ベアトリーチェなんて人物が本当にいると思う？
さあ、あくまでも偽名じゃないっすかね。じい様の代理人として、その妄想の中の魔女の名を名乗ることを許された、とか。
そうじゃなくて。今この六軒島には全部で18人いるの。
18. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Wow.
19人目が存在すると思う？
There really a full 18 people on this island right now? Wondering about that, I began counting on my fingers, and it really did come out to that many.
19人目が存在すると思うって、どういう意味ですか？
言葉通りの意味。マリアちゃんに傘を貸した人物は私たち18人の中にはいないらしい。なら19人目がいて、その人物がマリアちゃんに傘を貸したと思うのが妥当じゃない？
そうなりますね。
ならその人物は今どこにいるの？少なくとも雨が降り出した瞬間には島にいた。そしてその後はどんどん天気は悪化して、とても船なんか出せない状態。となればその人物はまだ島の中にいて、どこかで雨宿りをしていない。私たち誰の目にも触れずね。
確かに。俺たちは屋敷やゲストハウスの中を勝手にうろつき回ってましたが、屋敷やゲストハウス以外に雨宿りできるところだってあるのかも。
At about this time, I began to realize that direction Kirei-san's suspicions were taking us in. Kirei-san was denying that the 19th person existed. Beatrice was one of us 18. Huh? In other words, she thought someone we knew well was tricking us.
ベアトリーチェが自称する通りなら、その人物は間違いなく最高の賓客よ。
Masa iya sih? Siapa? Genji sih? Gak mungkin kan? Yang paling dipercaya sama Kinzo kan Genji.
おじい様が信頼する最高の腹心。そんな人物をおじい様が歓待しないわけがない。お屋敷に迎え入れないわけはないのよ。でも私たちは誰も見ていない。
待ってくださいよ。それはちょいと請求な推理じゃないですか？確かに誰の目にも触れてはいないけれど、だからって19人目を否定することには何かの理由があって、こっそり上陸してずっと悪魔の証明っていることを証明するのはたやすい。ベアトリーチェってやつが俺たちの前に現れて挨拶すりゃ、でも19人目がいないことを証明するのは不可能っすよ。
バトラ君の推理の仕方は悪くないわ。現在の状況では19人目の存在を認めるにも否定するにも情報が足りない。でもね、チェス盤をひっくり返して考えると、ほぼ19人目はありえないって断言できちゃうのよ。
Spin the chessboard around was one of Kirei-san's favorite phrases. I've been influenced by those words and used them myself from time to time. When you get stuck trying to find a move in chess or shogi, then by spinning the board around and looking at everything from your opponent's standpoint, you can often see a strategy that will give you the upper hand. It means turning things around and putting yourself in your opponent's shoes.
いい？ 仮に19人目の人物としてベアトリーチェが実在したとし、その人物は誰にも知られることなくこっそりとこの島に何かの理由があってね。ならどうしてわざわざ姿を現してマリアちゃんに手紙を渡したの？
It really was a contradiction. If they had some reason for hiding themselves, then they should have stayed hidden in the whole time. But even so, they had appeared only openly in front of Maria. Wah,
それは
jangan-jangan kawanan Maria nih.
ほらマリアも言ってた。メッセンジャーにされたって言ってたじゃないですか。マリアが一番年下で素直そうだったからじゃ。
メッセンジャーなんて必要なの？手紙を親族会議の席上に送りたかったら郵送すればいいだけの話よ。4人の兄弟全員に郵送すれば黙殺することもできない。手紙を持参してこっそり手渡す理由がないのよ。
確かになんだかおかしな話っすね。
そもそもベアトリーチェが存在していて、その存在をアピールしたいならみんなの前に堂々と姿を現せばいいだけの話なのに現れず、マリアちゃんという小さな子を通しておぼろげな輪郭だけでその存在を主張しようとする曖昧さ、矛盾。もっと考えて。マリアちゃんの前に姿を現し19人目の存在を印象づけるという点と、今この瞬間も私たちの前に姿を現さず隠れ続けている点、これらの矛盾、これを念頭に置いた上でチェス盤をひっくり返すの。
Tapi ya kenapa ya? Kenapa dia masih belum muncul?
つまり19人目の人物としてベアトリーチェがいると印象づけたい人物の目論見は何かよ。
姿を隠したい人物ならその存在を、そして姿を現したい人物ならってことは。
簡単よ。ベアトリーチェは18人の中にいるのよ。だからこそ18人以外の人物が存在するようなこれ見よがしな19人目のアピール。それで得をするのは姿を潜めた19人目じゃん。すでにいる18人の方なのよ。もちろんこの推理は穴だらけ。いくつかの前提がひっくり返るだけですぐに崩れる脆いものだけど、私はほぼ間違いないと見てるわ。
This is starting to feel pretty creepy. Someone lent Maria the umbrella and handed her the letter. Supposedly, none of the 18 did this. Well, kalau emang niatnya buat bikin apa namanya, apa guys, apa sugesti kalau ada orang ke-19 ya masuk akal kalau misalkan di meja makan nggak ada yang ngaku gitu loh. And yet Beatrice was hidden among those 18. Tapi enggak, Beatrice pasti ada. Aku yakin ada, tapi aku nggak tahu ini letternya beneran dari Beatrice atau bukan. What was this person planning, hiding their true form and pretending to be Beatrice?
マリアちゃんの自作自演も疑ったんだけど、文章の内容が非常に手が込んでて、マリアちゃんが自前で用意したとは考えがたい。でもマリアちゃんが何者かと共謀している可能性も否定できないわ。
おいおい、マリアは9歳のお子様だぜ。誰と何を共謀するってんだよ。しかも愚直で真面目で素直なあの性分だぜ。
ええ、私もマリアちゃんの性分はよく理解しているわ。でもだからこそあり得ると思うの。魔女に憧れその存在を盲信している夢見がちな少女。そこにベアトリーチェと名乗る人物が現れて魔女だと名乗ったら、彼女はそれを大喜びで鵜呑みにして信じるんじゃないかしら。
I don't think so.
つまりあの肖像画のごついドレスを着て変装すればマリアを騙すことは難しくないと。
その論法になっちゃうと、私たち女性陣はみんな疑われちゃうことになるんだけどね。とにかくマリアちゃんが何者に出会ったのか、それの詳細を聞くことがこの謎を解く一番にして最も身近な鍵なのよ。しかしその鍵は少女の心の奥に堅くなに閉ざされてしまったわ。みんなが頭ごなしに魔女の存在を否定し、一体その人物は誰なのかと問い詰めすぎた。マリアちゃんは当分大人には心を開かないでしょうね。
Taurus. In the dim hall, in front of the portrait of Beatrice, Maria was sobbing.
誰もね、マリアがベアトリーチェに会ったことを信じてくれない。ベアトリーチェとくれた手紙も見せたのに、それでも信じてくれないの。
Kesian anjir. Udah mah ditabokin. Terus gak ada yang
とにかく
percaya.
鍵はマリアちゃんが握ってるわ。
Anyway, Maria Chan's holding the key.
ベアトリーチェが18人の中にいるのか19人目なのか、それを知る鍵をね。
マリアは頑固だぜ。あいつへそを曲げるとなかなか機嫌を直さないからな。
Kasian juga tapi pas nangis ya. Kalau pas nangis kasihan, tapi kalau pas tantrum sumpah Saks. Aku ikut kesel Saks denger tantrumannya Saks. When that girl gets angry, it's pretty hard to make her feel better.
大人の私より子供のバトラ君の方が機嫌を直せる確率は高そう。彼女の機嫌が直ったら聞いてみて。遺産分配がどうのこうのって話には関心ないけど、こんな王道洋館ミステリーみたいなシチュエーションにはワクワクしちゃわない？マリアちゃんに手紙を渡した人物は一体誰なのか。知的好奇心がうずくわ。
Ya sih pengen tahap mulutnya. Hep, diem deh. Diem. Bunganya nggak ada di situ.
うんざりするような金の話に付き合わされてもワクワクとは実にタフなことだぜ。大人はすげえや。
I shrugged exasperatedly, but I did notice something. Kiria noticed how dejected I was after overhearing our parents' turbulent discussion, and was probably trying to clear the air. At the very last, I had recovered enough to voice my complaints. She wasn't my real mother, so I've never felt like calling her mom. But it did make me think she's a real adult.
おうガキども、ここにいたのか。
Anjing, diam kamu Rudolf.
キリエも長え化粧直しじゃねえか。俺も次からは化粧をしてくることにするぜ。
ごめんなさい、女の化粧は長いのよ。どう？兄弟水入らずの話し合いは。
さぞや和気あいあいとしてるだろうよ。
Desmond. Kiria-san poked the weak spot under my arm with her elbow.
一度頭を冷やそうってことで小休止さ。こりゃ夜通しになりそうだぜ。泣けてくれ。
His way of talking had changed, but he couldn't completely hide his fatigue. I couldn't say I was sympathetic, but he looked pitiful compared to his normal, energetic self.
しかしひでえ雨だな。ゲストハウスに戻るのも嫌になるぜ。夏日姉さんが屋敷で泊まれるよう準備してくれたらしい。どうする？
3階になった時に考えてもいいんじゃない？部屋に戻る体力もなくなってたら、その時はお世話になりましょうよ。
そうだな。その時に考えりゃいいか。バトラーはどうする？
俺がいちゃお邪魔だろうからよ。気使って向こうに戻るぜ。
そうか。すぐ戻るのか？
さあな、一人で戻ったって寂しいしよ。子供全員で揃って帰ることにするぜ。
そうだな。そうするといい。それで、バトラー。お前、今夜はそうは簡単には寝ないだろう。
Do what you mean?
多分、いとこたちとおしゃべりしてるだろうからな。
Uh,
夜更かししそうな気配はあるぜ。それがどうかしたのかよ。
そうか。もし、大人たちの会議が終わってお前がまだ起きてたら、ちょいと家族でしたい話があるんだ。
apa nih ya? Udah tumben banget Rudolf.
なんだよ。柄にもねえな。
Apparently, Kiriesan was thinking the same thing. What are you talking about? She asked him in a small voice. It looked like Kiriesan didn't have a clue what that meant either.
キリエにも聞いてもらいたい話だ。後で話すから。頼む。
I don't know anyone who neglects the concept of family as much as this old bastard. And now he's saying we're gonna have a talk as a family. Both Kiriesan and I couldn't help but get wide eyes.
そうビビった顔すんなよ。ビビりてえのは俺の方なんだ。何しろ。
At that point, he swallowed his words for an instant. Even though putting on airs of importance wasn't much like my dad.
気持ち悪いぜ、親父。
Dad kira mirip kamu emang ya? Nggak sucks, beda sucks. Rambutku kalau dimiringin kayak gitu kali ya. Terus belakangnya pendekin. Nah.
Ima, 家族は全員揃ってるじゃねえかよ。もったいぶらずに言えよ。
俺は多分
Tonight.
今夜殺されるだろう。
What you mean? What you mean, Rudolf? No, Rudolf. No. Dia ngeselin tapi tidak. Sama sedikit lah, itu versi lebih short. Saks, kamu kok nggak pernah buka kacamata? Soalnya kayak aneh gak sih, Saks, aku buka kacamata. Nah, aneh gak sih? Aku merasa ketika aku membukanya aku seperti orang lain, seperti karakter lain, not like myself. Ini terlihat terlalu feminim. So, apalagi ya? Nyala tuh matanya. There was a huge crash of thunder. It must have been really close. That expression brightly illuminated by the lightning was burned into my eyes. Dad's face, which always looked so sure of itself and which always wore a taunting expression, was strangely frail in a way I couldn't really explain. Kenapa? Apakah percakapan dewasanya terlalu panas sampai dia merasa kalau sepertinya malam ini aku akan meningsoi? What do you mean terlalu feminim? Kayak, ntar dulu. Nah. Feminim bejir. Kayak ada yang hilang aja gitu loh kalau aku nggak aku lepas kacamata. Nah, sudah biasa. Sudah biasa seperti ini, jadi ya biarkan saja seperti ini. Tapi nanti niatnya 2.0 nggak ini sih, bakalan lepas kacamata saya. Belum ada ininya guys, belum ada desainnya. Baru konseping doang. Oh ini udah. It was so worn out that he looked like a different person. Bagus.
Hah?
Oh iya, makasih. Kapan tuh poin? Oh, masih lama, Saks. Tunggu aku enip kedua, Saks. Aku belum masih preparing budgetnya ya. Konsepnya juga masih preparing. Tapi kalau kalau lancar ya, kalau budgetingnya lancar, semoga ya. Nanti di bulan April aku udah mulai komis artnya sih, live 2D-nya. Riggingnya mahal anjir. Pengen satu rigger sama Perin tapi 3 jutaan. Gelo. Wah.
何言ってんだよ、ガラでもね。
同感よ。どうしたの？急に弱気ね。あなたらしくもない。
俺も化粧直しに行ってくる。
Ke Papi Alan atau gimana? Iya, ke Papi Alan.
ついてくんなよ。
That turned away weakly. After that, only Kiria and I were left. Still wide-eyed. Haruskah aku summon my friend?
なんだってんだ。
Iya kan? Aku consideringnya nih ya. Tergantung budgetnya nanti. What did he say?
今夜殺される？まさかあの妙な手紙のせいで親父ビビっちまったのか？連続殺人者の映画の見過ぎだぜ。
No, tidak, Kiria akan menjadi janda. Tidak. Nggak apa-apa, aku siap nampung. Kiria-san didn't answer my light-hearted words and continued to stare at my dad's disappearing back.
バトラ君はルドルフさんに今話せと言ったら話さず立ち去った。みんなに話すことがあると言い出しながらどうしてチェス盤をひっくり返す。すると
話すと言っておきながら話せない矛盾。なんすかね。親父側から見ると何か見えてきますか？
ええ、見えるわよ。話したいことがある。でも自分から言い出す勇気がない。だから追ってきて俺に話しかけて聞き出してくれが正解ね。ついてくるなも逆の意味よ。
Gila, keren banget kamu, Kiria.
ついてきて俺を問い詰めてくれが正解。まったく甘えん坊さんなんだから。
Ternyata Rudolf Sundere.
そういう推理でいいんすか？そんなんめちゃくちゃな。
名探偵や名刑事が男女の気持ちや心を推理できる？できないでしょ？異性の気持ちを探るのは何次元のトリックを暴くよりはるかに高度な技術なのよ。
If you ask me, romance novels have much deeper mysteries than masterpiece mystery novels. Well.
は、そういうもんすかね。
私はあの甘えん坊さんと一緒にいるわ。普段は虚勢を張ってるけど、今夜はかなりの激論で誰かに寄りかかりたい気持ちなんでしょうね。それに応えるのがパートナーの役目よ。
はあ、そりゃお熱いことで。
Rudolf hoki banget nih.
じゃあ、
Laki berat.
うちのクソ親父の世話をよろしく頼みますよ。
ええ、任せておいて。
I called it out to Kirie-san's departing back.
え？ 何？
いや、ありがとよって、おかげで、陰鬱な気分がだいぶ晴れたぜ。
ならよかった。コミュニケーションは大事ね。
She's so nice after answering with a wink. Kiriye-san followed after that. Dad. Don't get killed, Dad. Natsuhi could be found in a dimly lit hallway. Now and then the thunder would crash, but this had no effect on Natsuhi's expression. She looked completely worn out. The discussion that had just taken place between the relatives in the dining hall was repeating itself inside Natsuhi's mind. Beatrice had proclaimed that in addition to the gold, all of the inheritance and property of the Ushiromiya family would be given to the person who could solve the riddle. In other words, she planned to undermine the absolute guarantee that Kraus, as the oldest brother, had to succeed the family had. Originally, the other siblings had absolutely no chance to inherit the headship. To them, this proposal by Beatrice was extremely desirable. It was obvious that they would accept it. There was no need to play some clumsy detective game. Natsuhi knew that this so-called 19th person, Beatrice, couldn't exist. Naturally, Beatrice was nothing more than a fictional character used to pass a message that Kinzo had written himself. As proof, Kinzo had remained stubbornly neutral as to that letter's authenticity. He was completely ignoring these reckless claims that he shouldn't be able to ignore, that he had given up the head's ring. In short, Kinzo had wordlessly admitted that the letter held his own message. Most likely one of the servants had given Maria the letter. Kinzo had probably worked out an elaborate plan where the trace from the portrait would be prepared. And someone, probably Shannon, would be made to wear it and deliver the letter and the umbrella. By doing that, he could make it seem like the witch from the portrait actually existed. No, if anything, that alone was proof that Kinzo was behind all this. In that case, it was the same as Kinzo trying to put in on the siblings' private discussion. Then Kinzo, by announcing that he would give everything to the person who solved the riddle, could weaken Kraus' overwhelming advantage. No, it was certain. Kinzo had eavesdropped on the siblings' discussion in the parlor earlier that day. So he had known how Kraus had stayed off the attack by the other three. And to make the scales of the battle go back into balance, he had sent out this strange letter, which benefited Kraus' rival. He was trying to push this crazy theory so that Rosa, who had a weak position among the siblings because of her age, would join with Eva and Rudolph. Then, with a 3-1 advantage, they would be able to overwhelm Kraus yet again and make their ridiculous theories get accepted by force. And by doing that, he gave them the power to resettle what had once been a narrowly decided conflict. Ternyata emas yang dicari selama ini adalah keluarga. They made along the way karena keluarga adalah emas yang tak terhingga. Anjay, gila, keren saks. Kamu dapat dari mana tuh kata-katanya? Tapi ada yang ini sih, ada yang siapa ya kemarin tuh yang berteori positif seperti itu. Kayaknya si dokternya Nanjo deh. Dia tuh positive thinking kalau riddle-nya ini emang sengaja dibikin buat mempersatukan keluarganya lagi gitu. Using the condition that all of the siblings would guarantee Krause's position as the successor, talk about advance payments was being brought up again despite having been rejected once. Of course, even without the story about the hidden gold, the Ushiromiya family's store of wealth was vast. That store of wealth alone was more than enough. Even if the hidden gold was buried forever along with Kinzo's death, there would be more than enough to satisfy. Therefore, even if they weren't that interested in the gold itself, Kinzo had managed to instill the lifelong fear that on the off chance that someone found the gold, that person would be granted the headship. And this kind of hill would definitely be taken advantage of by someone sooner or later. Halo Ichan. Aku tidak expect akan melihat dirimu di sini, Ichan. Halo. The only person with this fatal weakness was the successor, Krause. The other siblings had found. No, they had been told by Kinzo about something that only Krause could lose, and they had thoroughly taken advantage of that. Natsui, as Krause's only ally in his painful position and as his wife, wanted to fight alongside him, Natsui. She kept trying to explain to him that the existence of the gold itself was a false maybe, and that there was no need for him to compromise. Krause had always told Natsuhi. He had told all of the siblings. Kepo aja channel tuh apa ini? Channel alter aja buat streaming game-game yang minim interaksi, yang full kebanyakan story gitu, atau mungkin ya game yang membosankan untuk ditonton lah intinya. He always said that the hidden gold was nothing more than an illusion created by Kinzo. Therefore, Natsuhi had believed it as his wife and had supported her husband on that foundation. Even so, Natsuhi's words didn't reach Krause. Even though Natsuhi had fought so hard and had lent all of her strength, he continued to fight by himself and was trying to compromise with the other three siblings. Natsuhi sadly and weakly wondered why she could not be useful to him, then started getting angry. It had happened when everyone decided to take a short break to cool their heads. Natsuhi had flared up against Krause. Enraged, he had asked why she could not be useful to him. He had then told her that he wanted to talk about something and invited her into a room that she was normally not allowed to enter. That room had been sealed with a heavy-looking padlock, and just looking at it had given her an uncomfortable feeling.
他の3人の言うことも、ベアトリーチェを名乗る不審人物の言うことも、何も気にかけることはありません。黄金など所詮はお父様が生み出したまやかし。それを見つけられることなどあるわけがない。あなたが跡継ぎであることは盤石です。何を恐れることがあるのです。
Krause removed the padlock on the door. He then mentioned it for Natsuhi to enter.
入りたまえ。
Hello.
何ですか？
見せたいものがある。君に初めて見せるものだ。
Hello, apa tuh? Natsuhi timidly opened the door with a dubious expression on her face. It was pitch black. She searched for a switch to turn on the lights, but since this was her first time in the room, she didn't know where it was. Krause entered behind her, pushing her in, and when he closed the door before turning on the lights, the two were swallowed up by the darkness. Only the sounds of crows locking the door rang out through the dark.
これは何事ですか？明かりは？
今つける。待ちたまえ。
Just as he said, then when Kraus pushed a switch on the wall, a flickering light turned on and lit up the room.
それは？
Apa nih? Emas kan? Natsuhi had her breath taken away. The room had no windows, and at a glance it appeared to be empty. In the middle of the room, a small round table had been set, and the lights brightened only at that table, as if it were the leading part in that play. On top of the table, a red tablecloth of elaborate design had been set out, covered with dust. And on top of that, something about the size of a grown man's arm had been set down. That something took Natsuhi's breath away. Holy shit.
凄まじい純度を持つ黄金のインゴットだよ。
Kilo.
こいつがなければ誰も黄金伝説を信じはしなかった。
It was an ingot of solid gold. Even in the faint light, it sparkled with a noble and dignified glint.
こいつはまともなインゴットじゃない。
It took a high level of skill to make the purest of solid gold ingots. And in order to verify that purity, it was standard to have the original foundry and the name of the bank that guaranteed it imprinted on the gold. However, this ingot did not have that kind of seal. This mysterious gold bar had come from an unknown foundry.
ここを見たまえ。怯えることはない。こいつはただの金塊だ。
Natsuhi, following Crow's words, timidly approached the ingot.
そこだ。
Cross pointed at the surface of the ingot. Natsuhi concentrated on that section. Right there was the thin imprint of the one-winged eagle crest. Natsuhi's breath was taken away once again.
そうだよ。これこそが親父がベアトリーチェに与えられたといい、保証人のマルソーの会長に任意で一つを抜き取らせて持ち帰らせ、財界のフィクサーたちを信用させたという。方々に手を尽くして私が見つけた。他の兄弟たちに
Kegores ya? Kepotong gitu.
そんな。じゃあお父様の黄金伝説は？
実在する。後ろ宮金蔵が授けられたベアトリーチェの。
そんな。本当にあるなんて。
Natsuhi was shocked. Crows had always said that Kinzo's gold was just a fabrication, so she had believed it as his wife. However, the reality was different. Since he held definite proof, he had been more certain than any of the other siblings that the legend of the gold was true. Because of this, Cross was deeply frightened at the possibility that someone other than himself would find the gold he would fail to find, costing him everything. But to Natsuhi, this truth was more than enough to split up her heart. She had thought that, as Kraus' wife, she should be his closest confidant, which was why she had selflessly supported him. And yet he had hid this fact from her until today. Why? Mungkin ya karena tidak ingin kamu gegabah membeberkan.
そこまでに私はあなたの信頼に足りないというのですか？
そういうつもりはない。話す必要がなかっただけだ。
あなたにとっては妻はその程度のものなのですか？
落ち着きたまえ。 劇場にすぐ駆られるのは君の悪い癖だ。
あなたがそうさせてるんじゃないですか。私は後宮家に嫁ぎ、今日まであなたの妻として仕えてきました。あなたのために生まれた家を捨て、身も心も捧げてお仕えしてきました。その報いがこれなんですか。そんなことって。
Kraus grimaced, looking annoyed. His expression effectively communicated how much he disliked this part of Natsuhi, even if he didn't say it out loud.
私はもうあなたの力になれそうもありません。
兄弟のトラブルを私が自分の力で解決する。君の力は借りんよ。
違います。これは後宮家のトラブルです。確かに私にはこの身に家紋を刻むことが許されていません。でもあなたの妻です。
Kraus, jangan bikin dia malah berpaling menjadi musuhmu, Kraus.
なのに
Comfort her.
力添えする資格もないのですか。あなた。
君を思えばこそあえて関わらせなかったのだ。これ以上は頭痛に障るだろう。君は今夜は兄弟の話は兄弟で、君は関係ない。それだけだ。
Serba salah sih kalau apa ya, kayak emang ada pertimbangan gitu. Aku mau mihak juga nggak bisa di sini soalnya sama reasonable gitu loh. Maksud dari si Kraus itu kan, si Natsu ini orangnya suka terbawa emosi, suka apa ya, jadi bilang mentalnya nggak stable gitu. Kalau apa-apa terlalu terlibat rasanya kasihan juga dia, keberatan mentalnya. A dull headache tormented Natsuhi. No matter what medicine she took, no matter what scans she burned, it wouldn't heal. In fact, simply wandering alone through the dark corridors and listening to the sounds of the rain seemed to be a better cure. Maybe Natsuhi, but I was never of Shiromiya, Natsuhi. I have been despised and treated as a bereaved womb, and insulted when I couldn't even feel that role. Even so, I have tried to properly perform my duties as a wife. But now, even my husband has rejected me. I've done my best raising my daughter as if it were the last job left to me. No, don't be sad, Natsuki. However, I've had to no release for my anger and sadness, and they have caused me to subconsciously strain that relationship too, because I've been excessively strict in Jessica's education. She dislikes me too roughly. She despises me for having no interest in anything but grades. There is no longer anything I can do for the Shiromiya family. No, that's no good. Despite it all, I must help my husband and beat back the scams of the other greedy siblings. The family head won't be around much longer. Eventually, Cross will succeed the head, and the next successor will be Jessica. Strictly speaking, the man who enters the family by marrying Jessica will become the next head, but it all comes to the same thing. I have to make Jessica an excellent successor, whom everyone will accept as worthy to take over the Shiromiya family. Allow me, Min. I don't feel like sleeping yet, so I stream again. In the days to come, that greedy Ushiromiya Eva will probably be plotting to find some fault with the main family. And if all goes as she plans, Jessica will be dragged down from the succession with Courage set up in her place. It is regrettable, but Courage is a man and even more has matured as a person. Compared to Jessica, who is right in the middle of her rebellious period, and whose grades are slightly below average. Oh no, Jessica, no! It can be seen at a glance who is more fit to succeed ahead. So in order to secure Jessica's position, I need to turn her into an excellent person. After doing that, I want to find her an excellent husband worthy of the excellent person she will have become. A wonderful man who will truly accept Jessica and stay with her through all of life's joy and sorrows. Was Natsuhi trying to entrust her daughter with fulfilling some desire of her own? Natsuhi thought back to the days when she had no choice but to marry into the Ushiromiya family because of that unavoidable fate. She had tried to block that from her memory. She had consciously forgotten it and had actively attended to the life she'd been given as Ushiromiya Natsuhi. And in so doing, she had built up a new life. But just now, it felt like all of that had been casually rejected. Saurumin. Sudahkah dirimu Saurumin? Natsuhi helplessly rested her head against the glass of the window. The glass, which was cool thanks to the raindrops beating against it, felt somehow refreshing even though it should have been emotionless. Right then it seemed to be the only thing that could understand Natsuhi. At that point, even if someone had appeared, Natsuhi didn't intend to pay any attention to them, but she did pay attention because it was her beloved daughter.
母さんか。なんだよ、こんなところに。幽霊かと思ったぜ。
Just like always, her words were rough and not at all like a girl's. Instinctively, words of rebuke arose to Natsuhi's throat. However, their strength gave out and they didn't escape her lips.
Jessica, ごめんね。母さんは頭痛がひどいの。そっとしといてくれる。
そう。
Jika was seeing her mother in a position of feebleness for the first time, so she was considerably disconcerted. Until just now, she had been filled with contempt for all of the parents, including her mother. But now, those feelings had been completely swept away. Her mother's utterly exhausted face had wiped them all out. In its place, the words George had told her floated back up in her mind. Our parents are doing their best in their own way. And because their families are counting on them, they can't afford to keep everything pleasant and have a heavy responsibility to fight. Maybe her mother had been standing around in this dimly lit hallway because no one had tried to understand that in her. Jessica had hate her mother. So she had no intention of speaking kindly to Natsuhi just because she was looking a bit frail. So when she attempted to speak kindly to her mother anyway, she had to clench her fists and gather up the words from deep in her heart.
ずいぶん立て込んだ話をしてるようじゃん。
お前には関係あります。
What you mean, Natsuhi?
よそへ行っていなさい。
頭痛ひどい？私、薬もらってこようか。
構わないで結構です。お願いだから一人きりにして。
Anjir, baru kali ini dia ngomong soft ke kamu malah buka hatimu. Natsuhi wasn't being cold. She just wanted her daughter to go far away so that she wouldn't have to bump against Natsuhi's own short temper. But there was no chance that Jessica would realize this. Jessica hung her head, looking sad. Seeing that expression, Natsuhi recognized the kindness that Jessica was trying to muster. She gave her head a small shake to drive away her own unkind feelings.
じゃあ私、行くよ。大人の邪魔にならないように、いとこたちと一緒にいるから。じゃあ。
お待ちなさい。
She called Jessica, who was trying to leave and looked lonely, to a stop.
何？
気遣いを。
Ah,
と
oh my god. Tete.
お前を残して寝込むわけにはいきません。
よせよ。縁起でもないぜ。
心配をかけました。もう大丈夫です。私は行きます。
If I let my daughter see me this feeble any longer, I will only make her feel more uneasy. With that thought in mind, Natsuhi left Jessica with words of gratitude and made to depart. This time, Jessica called out to her mother's back. Natsuhi stopped and turned around, asking what business Jessica had with her. But Jessica herself didn't know why she would stop her mother. And for a while, she smiled wryly, muttering to herself as he hesitated over what to say. She was poking around in her pocket when her hand touched something, and she took it out.
あのさ、母さん。私さ、今日、お守りもらったんだよ。なんだっけな。魔除けだったっけ？確かその、ドアノブにぶら下げてるといいんだっけ？忘れちまったぜ。私が持ってても仕方ないし、母さんにあげるよ。
Oh my god, so cute! So wholesome, oh my god. Please jangan mati dulu. It was the scorpion charm that Maria had given her on the beach. Although she had heard of its various effects from Maria, Jessica's mind had gone blank, and she was just barely able to say even that much. Jessica, thinking that her mother probably wouldn't accept it anyway, immediately drew back the hand she had stuck out, grasping the charm. So when Natsuhi came back to take it, she was extremely shocked.
これは
Kata mati semua kecuali Maria, nanti dia yang ngebun-bun semua orang demi ke. Oh my god. Oh my god. No way. Kita mendapat Mary versi 2 kan?
何かの景品？
まあその、私も多分そうだろうと思ってるけど、こんなおもちゃみたいなお守りじゃご利益は期待できねえよな。
But her mother took the charm from where she grasped it in her hand.
ありがとう。大切にします。ジェシカには今度、私が子供の頃大切にしていたお守りを代わりにあげましょう。
あは、lucu, Tete.
別にそんなつもりで渡すんじゃないぜ。
別に。
でもまあ、
どうも
どうしてもって言うなら。
Ngelihat sendiri ini.
では私はもう休みます。頭痛がひどいのでジェシカもあまり夜更かしをしすぎないように。
And that's he put the charm in her pocket and turned it away. She then disappeared into the dark hall. Ntar Maria ngomong gini pas bun-bun semua orang. That's right, I'm the Umineko.
やっぱり明日も丸一日こんな天気みたいだ
Kamu
ね。
tahu nggak Umineko tuh artinya apa, Saks? Burung camar. Burung camar bukan ya? Ya burung yang bunyi di awal game itu yang suka ada di laut tuh. Kalau di Nemo tuh yang bilang main. Nah itu Umineko itu.
やれやれ。今日の日中が嘘のようだぜ。
George, Annika, and I were killing time in front of the parlor television. At that point, Jessica returned. Her face was still blank, but it looked like she had calmed down a little since we last seen her.
マリアはまだ肖像画前？
いや、さっき戻ってきて。今はそっちのソファーで寝てるぜ。
Udah capek dia.
マリアにはもう遅い時間だもんな。
Looking at the clock, I saw it was little past 10 p.m. Anjing. Masih jam 10 dari tadi. Mulutku sudah berbusa dan masih jam 10. Even if we were planning to stay up all night, it was about time to head back to our room.
一応うちのお袋が屋敷にも部屋を用意してくれたんだけどよ。どうする？
Umineko kalau bahasa Albanian artinya pemburu. Oh gitu, Saks. Keren. Amazing bo, Saks.
僕はゲストハウスに戻りたいかな。親たちの様子を見る限り僕たちはお屋敷にいない方がいいと思う。
俺も同感だぜ。子供は邪魔せず引っ込んでろって感じみてえだからな。おとなしくそうするさ。
As we were talking about this, Aunt Rosa came into the parlor. She was looking all over restlessly, probably trying to find Maria.
ローザおばさん。マリアならそこのソファーっすよ。
すっかり眠っちゃってるわね。ベッドに移さないと。
よかったら僕がベッドまで背負っていきましょうか。
ありがとう。助かるわ。ジョージ君たちはゲストハウスに戻るの？それとも夏日姉さんが用意してくれた部屋に泊まるのかしら。
今話し合ってました。ゲストハウスへ戻ろうかって話になったところです。
そう。ならマリアも一緒にしてあげてもいいかしら。
Anjing, Rosa, minimal bawa sendiri, gendong sendiri Marianya, anjir, udah mah di luar hujan, dasar.
いとこのみんなと一緒の方がきっと安心できると思うしね。
Behind those words, she seemed to be concealing some regret that the adults, herself included, had deeply hurt Maria's feelings. Well.
任してくださいよ、おばさん。何しろこっちにゃマリアをあやすことに関してはエキスパートがいるっすからね。
それは僕のことかい？僕だけじゃ無理だよ。みんなでだよ。
そうだぜ。バトラだってあんなにもマリアと意気投合してふざけ合ってたじゃねえかよ。
As we say this, Aunt Rosa smiled, looking truly happy.
みんなありがとう。
ありがとう。
私たちの話し合いはだいぶ遅くまでかかりそう。だから申し訳ないけどマリアをみんなにお願いするわ。
おい、マリア。熟睡か？ゲストハウスに戻るぞ。
Maria muttered something indistinct, rolled over and fell back asleep. It looked like she was sleeping deeply.
すっかり寝込んじゃったようだぜ。起こすのは悪いな。
僕が背負うよ。
Maria's body was much lighter than it looked. I lifted her up and put her on George Aniki's back. It was raining hard outside, and Aniki couldn't hold an umbrella and carry Maria at the same time. It looked like Aunt Rosa would come with as far as the guest house to help out. However, enggak kebaca.
困ったわね。もう戻らないと。皆さん、ゲストハウスまでお戻りですか？
After we left the hall on the way to the entrance, the door to the servant room opened and Shannon-chan stepped out.
だいぶ暗くなっておりますので、私がご案内させていただきます。ちょうどよかったわ、シャノンちゃん。ジョージ君がマリアを傘をさしてあげてくれないかしら。はい、かしこまりました。
Shannon-chan brought umbrellas for each of us and a flashlight to guide the way. Can you show me the way? Show me the way. As we opened the front door, the downpour was quite terrific. It looked like we wouldn't have any spare time to take a pleasant walk and enjoy the nighttime rose garden.
兄貴、重くねえか？俺が背負うぜ。
大丈夫だよ。マリアちゃんくらい背負えるよ。
マリアをよろしくお願い。
じゃあ、おやすみなさい、おばさん。
それでは、お送りしてまいります。ええ、よろしく。
Aunt Rosa watched us leave.
マリア、いつもごめんね。
Rosa's mumbling voice didn't reach the person in question, nor any of the kids, but disappeared beneath the sound of the rain. Yeah, say it again next time in front of the person you want. After cutting through the rainy rose garden, we arrived at the guest house.
俺がマリアを背負って立候補すりゃよかったぜ。
So yes. Aku mendengar suara orang, suara ember, nggak tahu suara orang depan apa belakang. If only I'd applied for the position of Maria Carey.
そうすりゃ、傘を差してくれるシャノンちゃんのでっけえお乳を二の腕でたっぷり堪能できたってのによ。
そんなつもりじゃないよ。誤解だよ。
そうしないとジョージ様が濡れてしまうと思いまして。
ほーら、バカなこと言ってないで入るぜ。
After being argued on by Jessica, we folded up on our umbrellas and went into the guest house.
お召し物を濡らしてしまった方はいらっしゃいませんか？
Aku basah.
タオルを用意いたしますが。
そこまで気を使わなくていいぜ。ありがとよ、シャノンちゃん。
そうだ。僕たちはこれからトランプでもして少し遊ばないかって話なんだけど、よかったら。
Kucing nabrak ember paling iya kali ya.
今日のシフト、深夜勤は誰になってんだ？
親族会議中は特別シフトになってたと思います。少し変更も出てるみたいなので、ちょっと確認してきます。
ああ、わざわざ屋敷に戻らないとわからないんなら無理に。
大丈夫です。ゲストハウスの使用人室でわかりますので。ちょっと失礼しますね。
Shannon-chan gave a quick bow and went into the guest house servant room. The rest of us headed for the cousin's room and decided to put Maria to bed for the time being. Maria was sleeping very deeply, and there was absolutely no sign of her eyes opening. For now, we get some soft drinks out of the room's refrigerator and drink those while playing cards or something.
あれ、
あれ、
カノン君、源氏様までこちらに。今夜のシフトはどうなっているのでしょうか。
クラウス様の命令があってね。シフトの大掛かりな変更があったんだよ。
うん。ゴーダがお屋敷の深夜勤に変更になった。シャノンとカノンはゲストハウスの深夜勤。私と熊沢はゲストハウスに泊まるようにとのご命令だ。
Mencurigakan. Goda mencurigakan.
お前も今夜はこのままこちらにとどまるよう。たった今電話があった。
ずいぶん大掛かりな変更ですね。お屋敷とゲストハウスの当番がまるっきり逆になってるじゃないですか。
Originally, Sharon and Canon had been assigned the night shift in the mansion, while the night shift in the guest house where all of the relatives were staying had been assigned to Goda, who had an abundance of experience in entertaining. Kumasawa should have been sleeping at the guest house, while Genji should have been sleeping in the mansion. However, it seemed that Kraus had suddenly ordered that the schedule be modified. Apakah akan terjadi sesuatu malam ini? The shifts at the guest house and the mansion had all been reversed, and Genji was spending the night in the guest house.
多分ベアトリーチェ様の手紙のせいだろうね。
多分ってどうして？
あんな怪しげな手紙が現れたらクラウス様が僕たちを疑うのは当然だからね。親方様直属の僕たちを極力親族会議の席から遠ざけたかったんだろうよ。
Genji, Shannon, and Canon were all permitted to wear the Ushiromiya family crest, the one-winged eagle, as the servants who served directly under Kinzo. Oh, saya. Aku nggak sadar anjir. Iya ini kan ada. Nih di paha anjir. Oh my god. Wow, Shannon. Iya ya si Goda nggak ada. Kumasawa juga nggak ada. Kira Kumasawa juga kerja di bawah Kinzo langsung. Terus kalau si dokternya nggak ada. Ini masih episode 1, Saks. Of course, since they were working for the Ushiromiya family, they had to obey anyone's order. But the only boss was Kinzo. Since only Kinzo held the right to employ them, even Kraus could not have them dismissed of his own accord. Because of this, Kraus and the others often viewed these servants as Kinzo's underlings and shunned them. And in fact, Kinzo seldom let anyone other than them enter his study. This sudden shift change was probably a clear expression of the sense of mistrust that had caused, considering the time Kinzo had left to live. This would definitely be the last family conference before the problem of the inheritance came up. On top of that, the mysterious letter that claimed to be from Beatrice had dropped in out of the blue. Kraus definitely wanted to keep Kinzo's loyal subjects away from the table of such a delicate and important discussion.
ではすまんが、私は向こうでもし何かあったら今夜のお客様は特別だ。
Oh.
はい、かしこまりました。源氏様。
Genji nodded back, went behind the screen, took off his jacket, and slowly began to relax after a day's worth of tension.
今お戻りになられたのはお子様方。
親族の方々はお屋敷で会議を。だいぶ長引きそうな雰囲気だったかな。
なら気楽だね。これ以上の深夜になって、しかもこの天気。多分親族の皆さんはお屋敷の方のお部屋にお泊まりさ。
多分ね。源氏様がいないから言うけど、ゲストハウス行きになってちょっと嬉しかったかな。
どうしてだい？意地悪な奥様やエヴァ様からそれとも別の理由があるのかい？
別の理由なんかありません。
そっか。
Apa nih?
なら二人で深夜勤を頑張ろう。
Seperti jam 20 jam lagi Pak Yumin. Emang iya 20 jam lagi? Kita tuh udah main berapa jam nih? 13 jam kan ya? Harusnya sih satu stream lagi kita ke episode 2 sih Saks kayaknya ya.
よろしく、姉さん。
私、ついさっきお子様方にお部屋で遊ばないかとお呼ばれしてて。
Shannon hung her head apologetically, gazing at Canon uncertainly. Canon didn't try to meet her eyes and spoke curtly as he sighed. It looked like he didn't plan on indulging his sister.
ダメだよ。深夜勤を仰せつかってる。それに僕たち家具にはわかるね。
そんなこと分かってます。
Shannon's shoulders drooped slightly. She had already expected that Canon, a stickler for rules, would say something like that, but she still seemed a little discouraged. As Canon flipped through a logbook, he spoke without facing Shannon.
ならお子様方をお待たせしてしまってる。深夜勤に当たってしまったからご一緒できないと謝ってこなきゃ。行ってきなよ。
私、謝ってくるね。
Shannon hurriedly stood from her seat before her brother's mood could change and flew out of the servant room after giving a quick bow. As she watched her go, Canon took a single deep breath. Kenji's voice came from beyond the screen.
カノン、私がここにいるから。
源氏様、誘われたのはシャノンだけです。僕は別に誘われては。
その場にいなかったからお声をかけられない。言えばお前も誘われている。たまには子供らしく遊んでくるといい。いえ、僕には必要ない行為です。人の子には遊びも必要でしょうが。
Human children may have a need to play.
僕らは家具ですから。
You're not a human, what you made.
そうか。
姉さんだって家具です。人のふりをしたって後で苦しむだけなのに、僕はそれが分かっているから人に近づきたくないだけなんです。
Genji did not say anything after that. After a while, he stood up and used a pot of water to make powdered cocoa, serving some to Canon as well.
そりゃ本当かよ。
Kita semua hanyalah alat. Kita semua diperalat oleh pemerintah.
そりゃ知らなかったぜ。
バカ、声が大きいぜ。マリアが起きちゃうだろ。
Batora was so surprised that he yelled obnoxiously and scattered his cards everywhere. His voice caused Maria to turn over once, but she soon fell back into a deep sleep. Jessica gave him a jab and he lowered his voice.
いや、しかし、言われてみれば、確かにそれっぽい雰囲気はあったんだよな。なるほどな。ジョージの兄貴がな。
What you mean? George couldn't be seen anywhere in the room. A short while ago, when Canon came into the room, George suddenly said that he forgotten something in the mansion and needed to go back and get it. Shannon said she would guide him just like she had on the way to the guest house, and the two of them departed together.
いや、昔からそれっぽい気配はあったんだぜ。
Apa George suka sama Shannon?
好きなものを聞いてきたり、趣味を聞いてきたりさ。単に関心を持つだけにしてはどうもなんて思ってたら。
そういや、昔っから上司の兄貴はシャノンちゃんにやたらと優しく。なるほどな。
天気予報によると今夜が一番ひどいみたい。明日いっぱいも止まないらしいけど、もう少しマシになるそうだよ。
そうですか。
Then maybe the boat won't arrive until the day after tomorrow.
ジョージ様の月曜日のお勤めに差し支えが出ないか心配です。
台風が来ていることは知っていたからね。万一に備えて月曜日には予定を入れなかったから大丈夫さ。こう見えてもスケジュールは先読みできるタイプなんだ。
George puffed out his chest, acting proud. Compared to the calm appearance George always had as the oldest cousin, he now looked amusingly like a little kid. Shannon chuckled at this abrupt contrast.
さすが、やがては会社を起こされる方はしっかりしていますね。
やっぱり会社を起こすというのは大変だね。お金とかそういうのだけじゃないものがとても大事だって父さんのところで勉強していてわかるよ。会社を起こすということは城を持ち部下を率いるということ。うちの父さんは秀吉って名前だけあって戦国武将のエピソードがとても好きでね。
どういうと？
会社経営の哲学をよくそこから語るんだ。知ってるかい？戦国最強の騎馬軍団と恐れられた武田信玄も最初は部下たちの結束がバラバラで統率力をまるで発揮できなかったんだそうだよ。
そうなんだか意外ですね。
信玄は部下たちを結束させるため数々のリーダーシップを発揮してるんだよ。例えば戦場で武功を立てた部下に対しすぐその場で報奨を与えたり、普通こういうのは戦が終わってからまとめてやるものだからね。それを戦場の本陣の中にいながらまめにやり続け、部下の武功を素早く評価しやる気につなげたというのは非常に大きいことだよ。それから部下が病気で伏せった時には誰よりも早く駆けつけお見舞いをした。武田信玄は戦国最強の騎馬軍団を率いただけじゃん、戦国一の部下思いの人だったんだよ。
そんな方だから部下の皆さんもついてきてくれたんですね。
The truth was, Shannon had already heard this story several years ago. But whenever a discussion of his father led to this sort of topic, George would always glow and look like he was having a great time. So Shannon just smiled without interrupting, urging him to continue.
確かに資本主義の世界ではお金は力で石垣の高さでもある。でもね、戦も城も自分一人じゃ成り立たない。大勢の部下に支えられ、その力を借りて初めて成立するものなんだよ。
Pintar kamu, George.
それを理解してから 父さんの背中を見ると、自分がいかに未熟で、父さんがどれほどの切磋琢磨をして今日を築き上げてきたかがよくわかるんだ。
ジョージ様はお父様のことをとても尊敬されているんですね。羨ましいです。
ごめん。別にそういう意味で言ったんじゃないんだよ。
すみません。私も別にそういう意味で言ったつもりは。
The two of them awkwardly looked at their bed. Shannon had no parents. She had been brought up in an orphanage owned by Kinzo called the Fukuin House, under the guidance of Kinzo, their honorary director. The orphanage offered members who excelled exchange work on the job serving experience. In their efforts met with Kinzo's approval, they would be able to leave the orphanage and work as a servant for the Ushiromiya family. This was considered to be the highest honor for those who lived in the orphanage. Servants from the Fukuin house all took names with the character on. Oh! Shannon, I see. So, Shannon wasn't her real name. The same went for Canon. All of the members of the Fukuin house were orphaned. At least, they were all people who had been separated from their parents under special circumstances. Because of this, the orphans had been taught to think of each other as their own family. That's why it seemed so natural to both of them when Canon called Shannon his sister, you see. And while both Canon and Shannon were working in the mansion today, there were several other servants possessing their own character in their names, such as Manon and Lennon, who often worked in a rotation schedule. However, there were not many servants who stayed with the Ushiromiya family for long. It was standard for them to quit after 3 years. So you could probably say that Shannon, who had been working for 10 years, was a notable exception to the rule. Working as a servant for the Ushiromiya family was a heavy burden to bear, but the pay wasn't bad at all. Working for a full 3 years would earn more than what was needed to enter mainstream society. It was why, even though the orphans realized what a hard task working for the Ushiromiya family was, they still hoped to be accepted. Maybe the fact that Shannon managed to continue working for 10 years wasn't because she had more willpower than the other servants. Maybe she got unstuck working for 10 years because she didn't have the courage to say she wanted to quit. Kinzo couldn't even trust his own blood relatives, and those excellent servants sent from the Fukuin house were the only ones he could rely on. Because of that, Kinzo would sometimes allow them to wear the family crest as servants under his direct control, and have them work close to him.
もう勤めて10年近くになるんだっけ。だいぶお金も貯まったんじゃないかい。
どうでしょう。別に私、買いたいものも特にありませんし、ほんの何百万かあったって、それで残りの人生を過ごせるわけもありませんし。
Lebih berduit dariね。
目標の額があってお勤めを続けてるわけじゃないのかい。
そうですね。私はこのお屋敷以外に行くあてもありませんし、お嬢様とも他の使用人の子たちとも仲良くやれてます。奥様には時折お叱りを受けますけど、バラの世話や
でもそれはシャノンちゃんのさよちゃんの人生じゃない。
Oh, Sayo. Tayo. Shannon cast her eyes downwards when she heard her real name. She understood what George was trying to say and fell silent.
僕は成人し社会人になってからも勉強して分かったことがある。子供の頃僕らが思っていたほど人生は単調で短くないんだ。
All school-aged kids have certain fears they can't shake. They wonder whether they will live the rest of their lives like sleepy classes after a monotonous and boring school day, spending their time in a carefree laziness without anything interesting happening until it's all over. However, life's only like that for underage students. Compared to a human life, the time they spend as students is nothing more than a blink of the eye, a period where they break through the shells of their immaturity. The inside of the shell might be a hot, suffocating and boring world. But the world beyond that shell is vast and filled with limitless possibilities.
君の人生はまだシャノンという殻の中でしかないんだ。君は自分の人生がこの生活のままずっと続いていくと勘違いしてるんじゃないかな。
それは
Shannon couldn't deny those words. She had been unable to harbor any clear doubts about her lifestyle, and since she never had any hope or goals for changing herself, she lazily continued living the way she always had. And if asked whether this life was satisfying, she wouldn't have been able to nod. She may have been intentionally averting her eyes from the truth. Without George's admonishments, she would have continued pretending not to notice as her real life slipped away bit by bit, neglected.
ジョージ様、私はこのままでいてはいけないのでしょうか。
いけないよ。あ、それから今ルール違反が一つあったね。
George immediately gave a strict answer, then broke out into a mischievous smile. Shannon already knew that what she was being chided for, and she hung her head again, apparently embraced.
僕たちしかいないときは様はなしの約束だよ。
Apa nih? Apa nih?
約束では聞けません。ですが、ご命令でしたら聞かないわけにはいきません。私は家具ですから。
じゃあ命令だよ。
はい、かしこまりました。ジョージさん。
As Shannon hung her head, her face red, she said George's name again, this time following it with sang.
うん。それでいいよ、さよちゃん。
George smiled at Shannon, no, Sayo, to praise her small act of bravery. This short exchange alone made it clear how far back their relationship was have stretched. For a long time, the two talked as if the weather raging about them didn't even enter their thoughts. They talked about the many memories they had built during this relationship that no one else knew about. Every once in a while, a flashing of lightning would attempt to interrupt them, but this could sully neither the rose nor the time they spent blushing at each other. Bang, masuk bang, hujan bang. Apa nih?
そうだ、君に見せたいものがあって。
なんでしょうか。
George, who had been speaking eloquently, suddenly started to stutter. Watching him, Shannon seemed request something. George timidly searched through his pocket. Something got caught in the depth of his pocket, and just like the stuttering George, it took a little while to get it out. Apa cincinnya? It was a very small box covered in a deep blue velvet. The peculiar shape was enough to tell anyone what was resting inside. Shannon had prepared her heart somewhat certain beforehand that this was what he had been planning. But even so, when she actually saw it, she couldn't avoid blushing once more. George opened the small box, took something out, and held it out for Shannon to take.
これを君に受け取ってほしいんだ。
このような高価なものは受
け取れない。
いえ、こんなもの私には過ぎていて。
さよ、これはお願いじゃない。命令だよ。この指輪を受け取ってね。
命令では従わなくてはなりません。
うん、そうだね。いい子だよ。
Iko dayo, what you mean Iko dayo? Oh my god! Shannon, not wanting to show her bright red face, timidly accepted the ring from George's hand while still staring at the ground. That ring wasn't a simple accessory. It was a noble object meant since ancient times to be offered to a special woman under special circumstance. Therefore, while George could order her to take it, he could not order anything beyond that. Anything beyond that would depend not on an order, but on Shannon's, no, Sayu's own will.
だから、ここからはもう命令じゃない。さよ、明日までに言葉でない形で返事がもらいたい。
Ini a real proposal kah? Apa cuman kayak would you be my girlfriend maksudnya, bukan secara terikat.
Wakaru ne? もうこれ以上は命令じゃないから、僕は君に命令はしない。
May kisah, when ya.
でも、指輪は指にするものだからね。気に入ってくれたなら、好きな指につけてくれればいい。
Shannon had only pretended not to know. She already understood what he wanted her to do. But she was standing at the huge crossroads of her life.
もうこんな時間だね。今夜はこれくらいにしよう。
George turned away from Shannon, acting just a bit bluntly.
君に左手につけてほしいと命令することもできるかもしれない。君も命令されればそれに従えるという臆病な甘えがあるかもしれない。でも最後のここだけは君のさよの意志でしてもらいたいんだ。わかるね。だからそれが命令。今夜よく考えて明日その返事を見せてほしい。
Ini sedih kalau misalkan udah kayak gini ternyata salah satu dari mereka bakalan mending nggak jadi. Aku tidak akan menghancurkan suasana. Omedeto. Shannon nodded back. Today was the culmination of their many days spent together. This moment certainly hadn't come as a surprise to Shannon.
そろそろゲストハウスに戻ろうか。これ以上遅いとみんなを心配させちゃうよ。
すみません。私、お屋敷にいようを思い出しまして、お屋敷へ行かねばなりません。
こんな時間に本当かな。
Jared stared into Shannon's face as he laughed mischievously. He definitely saw through Shannon's lie. However, when he saw how she felt, he could sort of understand that she might be so embarrassed that she wanted to be alone. So because George realized the meaning behind Shannon's lie, he accepted it. Oh. Bang, kapan ganti hari, Bang? Jam 11, anjir. Kira-kira jam 12 ada apa, guys? Shannon entered the entrance hall to the mansion with a tottering gait. A mixture of exultation and uncertainty gave her a feeling that she couldn't easily describe. It swelled up in her chest until it felt like she was about to burst. After stopping for a second in front of the servant room to take a deep breath and calm her heart, she opened the door. Inside, Gorda, who had been ordered to take the midnight shift at the mansion tonight, was absorbed in a worn-out crossword puzzle magazine. He looked up for an instant to see if one of the family had come, but when he realized it was a fellow servant, he returned to his puzzle as if nothing had happened.
源氏様より郷田さんのお手伝いにつくように言われてまいりました。
ああ、そうですか。それは助かります。そろそろ戸締まりの見回りに行きたかったのですが、ここを開けてもいいものか困っていたのです。何しろ旦那様方の会合はまだだいぶ続きそうですからね。いつ何時お茶のご用命があるかもわかりませんし。
そうですよね。
Tidak tahan saksi beriman ini game kah? Enggak juga sih. It's fine with this pace. Tapi aku penasaran dengan maju-majunya itu.
ではどうしましょうか。私が留守番を。
ではシャノンさん、申し訳ありませんが、お屋敷内の見回りをお願いします。私はここで親族の皆さんのご用命の待機をしておりますので。
はい。
Sharon was slightly disgusted. Even though she came here to help out as a favor, she was casually being forced to do the job of the person actually on duty. Furthermore, after one-sidedly forcing that task on her, Gohota returned to his magazine once again and became immersed in his crossword puzzle. Kesal dia. Shannon bowed her head and as a token sign of respect for her elder, then left the room to patrol the mansion. Thanks to her being a big take-off, she managed to suppress that faulty feeling she'd been having until just now. And anyway, she couldn't let Genji or Kanon see her looking like this. She wanted a little time to herself until her heart calmed down. So maybe going on patrol wouldn't be so bad. She began to hear the tumultuous voice of the family discussion coming from the dining hall. Someone was speaking at great length, only to be interrupted by someone else. The second person also began to speak in a very long drawn-out fashion until yet another person interrupted. They kept on repeating. It was as though their displeasure was seeping through their voice. She had been told to go to the guest house, so it would be bad if Cross discovered her. Thinking this, Sharon dashed past the dining hall. Then she went along a pre-arranged route through the dark mansion, checking that all the locks were secure. Inilah yang terjadi kalau author Yukisi nggak dikasih editor, kepanjangan bicara. Kayak banyak yang sebenarnya nggak banyak yang tidak perlu gitu, tidak perlu dimasukkan. Kayak bisa dipersingkat. Fillernya banyakan. Tapi ya better daripada animenya. She walked down the hall, checking each window. There were no humans on Rokenzima other than those connected to the family, so looking up didn't really serve much of a purpose. No one had been in the habit of looking up at the Ushiromiya head family, at least not until Natsuhi had scolded them for being careless. The metal fixtures on the window were ice cold, and as she checked them one by one, the glow in her heart seemed to cool down. At the time, she thought she saw something twinkling across the hall. Twinkling? How could anything be twinkling through the darkness of the hall? She figured she must have been imagining it, but she still held her breath. Grasping a curtain, she fearfully gazed down the hall. However, other than the occasional crack of thunder breaking the hallway, she was unable to glimpse any flicker again. It must have been her imagination after all. It must have been the wind. Ini kalau dia nggak ngelihat Beatrice di sini agak unnecessary banget sih, kayak ya udah dia matiin, dia ngecekin kunci doang, nggak perlu dimasukin anjir. Maybe her heart was so agitated that she'd seen something that didn't even exist. Sharon went back to checking the windows. However, a certain unnerving memory was resurrected in the back of her mind. It was that ghost story which had been passed down amongst the servants who served the Ushiromiya head family. The mansion had two different masters, one of the day and one of the night. Beatrice, the master of the night, would sometimes fly around the mansion in the form of sparkling butterflies. That was the story. Come to think of it, didn't Kanon-kun once say he'd seen it with his own eyes? Though he got sulky when I said he must have imagined it and refused to believe him. Could it possibly be true? The roar of the thunder gave no answer. Lanjutannya ke Silent Hill. Kejauhan kayaknya saks. Hello? Sama writernya soalnya. Emang iya? Apa nih? Unsettling sekali. Apakah oh enggak anjing. Apa nih, kenapa kalian tetap-tetapan? Ikat sama Rikishi. Si. Dari Higurashi. Tapi kalau Higurashi ke ini dulu nggak sih? Higurashi ke Umineko nggak sih? Kan ada 3 tuh ya? Ada 3. Ada dulu. Ada Higurashi, Umineko sama Kikonia. Aku nggak tahu nih, Kikonia harusnya nyambung juga sih. Kikonia. Apa nih bro? Oh, skip ke 6, jam 6. Oh my god, akhirnya. Banting setir dari VN ke survival horror. Tapi, Yur, menurut Silent Hill gimana saks ceritanya? Segilor 1986. Genji tightened his bow tie and looked outside through a crack in the curtains. Maybe the rain had died down a teeny bit since the previous night, but the thick rain clouds. Anjir, aku kecewa guys, gak ada Beatrice-nya malam itu anjing. Sakit hati. Didn't seem like they have been letting any trace of the morning sun get by. The morning was dim and far from refreshing.
やはり今日いっぱいはやみそうにないか。
お待たせしました、源氏様。
Tanon finished checking his appearance and exited the boss room. On the normal schedule, it was rare for anyone to have to suffer going straight from a midnight shift to an early morning shift. Gelo. Ini kamu kayak gini juga, Kamin. Bagus, cuman bukan Silent Hill aja. Kayak Esa cuma numpang judul doang. Kayak universe-nya tuh udah kayak beda gitu, Kak Saks. They were on a special schedule for the 2 days of the family conference. However, unless the typhoon phase today, the relatives' stay on this island will last until tomorrow. Canon thought it best to be prepared for the special schedule to last an extra day. The 2 of them left in the guest house, opening their umbrellas. The rose garden had been devastated by the wind and rain on the previous night. Even though they'd spent several days making it beautiful to welcome the guests, one stormy night was enough to ruin it. Canon sighed. The 2 headed for the mansion. They were supposed to meet up with Goda and prepare breakfast. Goda was such a perfectionist that he had probably already woken up and was probably already preparing a breakfast as exquisite and elegant as glasswork. They reached the overhang by the entrance to the mansion and folded up their umbrellas. Alhamdulillah belum pernah 24 jam. Kita pace pas awal game itu masih pagi nggak sih? Jam 8-an nggak sih? Belum 24 jam ini. Genji took a bundle of several keys from his pocket and unlocked the front door. The Ushiromiya family mansion was the only thing on Rakenjiba, so in the past they hadn't been in the habit of locking up. However, Natsu had ordered that the mansion be locked up from midnight to early morning. Ever since then, unlocking the door in the early morning had become part of servants' morning shift. This task had been given to Genji and Kanon, so that Goda could start preparing breakfast as soon as he woke up. Silence had fallen in the mansion, giving the impression that the mansion itself was still asleep.
では、朝の仕事を始めよう。
はい。
Kashikomarimashita. The two of them split up and began opening the curtains throughout the mansion. If the curtains stayed closed, the mansion would remain in full of infinite darkness, as though it was still trapped in the previous night. Following a well-rehearsed procedure, Kanon went around the mansion opening the curtains for one window after another without having to retrace his steps once. Even with this horrible weather, drawing the curtains made it feel just a little bit like morning. While doing that, he passed in front of the kitchen. Even though he hadn't smelled anything yet, his stomach started aching for some of Goda's prized cooking.
おはようございます。
He tried to greet Goda, who should have been getting breakfast ready, but Goda was nowhere to be seen. Apa nih? Emang kenapa kalau animenya Umigari katanya jelek, Saks? Nggak tahu jeleknya dalam artian apa, tapi ya katanya jelek sampai dianggap nggak ada animenya, Saks. Sama fandomnya ya. The kitchen was darkly lit, and not only were the curtains not open, but the fan wasn't even running. It was still cold, without any trace of a fire being lit, so of course there were no sign of breakfast being made either. Though it would have been inexcusable, perhaps Goda had overslept. Even servants are only human. Imsak guys, imsak. They sometimes sleep in and show up late. In the rare case that such a thing happens, it's a part of servant's code to hide the unsightly scene before anyone notices, smoothly cover it up. Make sure the family never even realized that anything has gone wrong. Kanon took the receiver of the phone that had been fitted to the wall and dialed the number for the extension line in the servant's sleeping room. He couldn't hear that characteristic sounds of the dial tone. Kanon tried picking up the receiver again, but even so, he couldn't hear the usual dial tone. He tried dialing again, but it had no apparent effect. Could the lightning last night have damaged some machine breaking the extension line? The equipment in this mansion was all worn out. Kanon fully understood that even the smallest thing could have caused it to break down. He gave up trying to wake Goda with the phone and dashed over to the servant's sleeping room. Oh, flashbang, oh no. How long has it been since I stopped sleeping and started lazily staring up at the ceiling? That vague sense of awakening was part of Natsuhi's usual morning experience. She always slept lightly and she couldn't sleep at all without medicine. To Natsuhi, sleep was definitely not a happy thing. Why? When she looked outside, she saw it was still pouring. If she hadn't sensed a tiny amount of light, she might have mistakenly thought that it was still the previous night. She herself was one of the hosts, so she mustn't wake up later than her guest. Urging herself on, She raised up her body, which still hadn't completely recovered from yesterday's weariness. No one would torment her as long as she remained inside this room, and her headache wouldn't get any worse here. This room was the only place she could find peace. So when she left, it meant returning to the world where her husband's siblings kept trying to stab each other in the back. In that case, would it better to just stay locked up in this room forever? That ridiculous notion brought a bitter smile to Natsuhi's face. She was starting to sound like Kinzo, though she often complained about Kinzo staying locked up in his own room and refusing to attend to everyone else. The truth was that she longed to do the same. Natsuhi gave her head a small shake, and her fantasy was replaced by the reawakening of her usual headache. When she reached for the doorknob, trying to leave the room, her hand touched the scorpion charm that she had hung from it before going to sleep the previous night. It was Maria's charm, which Natsuhi had received from Jessica. Didn't Jessica say something about it having the power to repel magic, telling her to hang it from her doorknob? Maybe it was thanks to the charm that at least this room had been protected from the malice of her husband's siblings. As she thought this, her mood began to get a little more cheerful.
ジェシカのおかげで少しはゆっくり眠れたということかしら。
Then Natsuhi remembered. That's right, that's last night. I promised Jessica that I would give her a charm of my own in exchange for this one, didn't I? Natsuhi opened a drawer on her dresser and took out an antique accessory case that she had treasured when she was a child. Inside, there were many small objects that Natsuhi had thought were valuable at the time. From amidst those, she pulled out a red pouch. Inside was a small, round mirror about 10 centimeters across. It looked quite old, but the design of the back on the back of the mirror was very ornate, and it felt like something with historical value. At the very least, it's much under the charm. It looked like a plastic or scorpion keychain. She had heard that this was spiritual mirror for warding off evil spirits, and she had been given it especially by her grandmother when her grandfather's mementos had been distributed. It had been believed since long ago that a strange power resided in this mirror. Perhaps people thought it could reflect calamity and malice in the same way it reflected light. Natsuhi returned the mirror to its pouch. It would probably be a fitting object to hand over to Jessica. Just as she was placing it in her pocket, the sound of someone knocking on the door suddenly echoed throughout the room.
はい。
おはようございます、奥様。早朝から申し訳ございません。
今行きます。何事ですか？
No servant had ever come to her this early in the morning, nor had they come to wake her in person. Perhaps something bad had happened. Maybe some fatal oversight had been made while preparing breakfast, something that would shame the household in front of their guests. Natsuhi took a deep breath in anticipation for whatever troubles he was about to hear of. When she opened the door, Genji once again gave a morning greeting while bowing deeply. Natsuhi tentatively responded.
おはようございます。何かありましたか？
申し訳ございません。昨夜の落雷で電話機器に故障が出たようです。内線電話が普通になっておりますもので、直接のお伺い。
内線電話が普通？それは面倒になりましたね。修理は可能ですか？
残念ながら故障箇所がわかりません。 後で業者を呼んで修理させたいと思います。
ということは、この台風が過ぎるまでは修理不能ということで、つまり客人たちの滞在中はずっと普通ということ。客人たちのお世話に支障は
出ないよう最善を尽くします。
結構です。粗相のないようよろしく頼みます。
Natsuhi let out a small sigh of relief. She had been prepared for the worst, but damage to the telephones wasn't the kind of trouble she was worried about. Then again, even this would probably be enough to spark sarcasm from Eva. Natsuhi gave her head a light shake.
朝食の準備は順調ですか？
それがゴーダの姿が見えません。
Oh, holy shit, where is Goda?
朝食の支度もまだ行われておらず。
何ですって？
Natsuhi was indignant. To her, this was much bigger problem than the phones not working. And despite that, this piece of information was the part that had been postponed. Why did everything go well most of the time and then come to something like this when the relatives were visiting? Natsuhi put her hand to her forehead and shook her head.
大方朝寝坊でもしているのでしょう。とにかく誰でもいいから急いで朝食の準備を。
Natsuhi exited into the hall and turned around for a second to close the door from her room. The creepy thing she saw there silenced her completely. It was an unpleasant sight, as though someone had dipped their fingers in a reddish black liquid and stretched. Anjir, hujannya gede banget di sini. At the door around the doorknob. Mana nggak kelihatan, anjir. Halo pagi cuy. Ohio. It was probably some sort of awful prank, arranged by some person who wanted to make it look as though they tried to force the door with dirty hands.
これは悪趣味な。
私も今ここにお伺いして初めて気づきました。
Oh, berarti semalam ini kah ada yang mau ngebunuh dia kah? Tapi gara-gara ininya charm yang dikasih Jessica jadinya tertangkal.
後ほど清掃いたします。
大方、趣味の悪い客人の冗談でしょう。不愉快です。実に不愉快です。
Who in the world will pull such a childish and disgusting prank? Natsuhi had a pretty good idea, but of course there was no proof, so even if she pushed the issue, it would just seem as though she was making a fuss about nothing. In fact, it would surely be better to act as though she hadn't even realized that such a prank had been played on her. Natsuki gave the order to have it cleaned and headed off to the parlor with a squeak of her heels. When Natsuhi and Genji arrived in the parlor, Eva and Hideyoshi were already there.
おはようございます、皆さん。
おはよう、夏日さん。朝食も合田さんが作るっちゅう話やないか。朝から胃袋が大喜びで騒ぎっぱなしなんや。
本家の楽しみは食事くらいがせいぜいですものね。
エヴァさんも朝からご機嫌がよろしいようで何よりです。
With the very expression Natsuhi retorted Eva's gaze, which was fiercely competitive despite the early hour. Then Canon joked in. After bowing in apology to the relatives for running inside the mansion, he noticed Genji and told him something in a small voice.
カノン、ゴーダはまだ見つからないのですか？
申し訳ございません。お屋敷内もゲストハウスも回ったのですが、まだ。
Oh shit.
一体どこへ行ったというのです。とりあえず今はゴーダより朝食の至急対応しなさい。
はい。
Kanon glanced at Genji. It seemed he had something else to report, but was uncertain whether or not the words should come from him. Genji nodded and decided to give the report himself.
奥様。
え？
ゴーダだけではありません。旦那様の姿もありません。
Oh shit.
主人が？
はい。奥様より先に旦那様に朝食の準備がないことをご報告しようと思い、それから旦那様だけではありません。ルドルフ様ご夫妻とローザ様のお姿もありません。
ゲストハウスにも屋敷にもですか？
はい。ゲストハウスの部屋にもおられません。
Kirain juga ya berarti. When she heard that Golda alone was missing, she had assumed he had slept in or was loafing around somewhere. However, now that she learned that several of the relatives were also nowhere to be seen, she began to take a slightly more optimistic view. Last night's family conference have continued all night up until the present moment? If so, they might have wanted to cool their heads after being shut in a stuffy room, going out for walks on their own through the rain. The part about cooling their heads, well, it sounded like something Cross would say. Goda had probably been summoned to accompany them and aid them in some way. Goda was not a man who lost track of time. He had to understand that preparations for breakfast would be hindered if he did not return. However, maybe the family conference had continued until this very moment. With an atmosphere that would make it hard for anyone to sleep out. Yes, the theory would be quite convincing for Natsuhi. She remembered the illusion she felt that morning as though the previous night had never ended. When she learned that the feeling wasn't just an illusion, she once again took a deep, weary breath. After that, the banquet of filthy vultures circling Kinzo's property was still going on.
大方、庭園のどこか、あるいは海岸の方で相も変わらず遺産の話を繰り返しているのでしょう。
That would be such a nonsense. What you mean?
とにかくゴーダを呼び戻さなくてはいつまでも朝食の準備が整いません。
ってことはなんや、兄さんたちの話し合いはまだ続いとるんか。
She had planned to say it in a small voice, but Hideyoshi overheard Nazuhe and managed to grasp the situation.
兄さんもルドルフもタフね。ローザの場合は若さかしら。私たち夕べの24時過ぎにはもう眠くてベッドに戻らせてもらったんだけど、確かにあの時点でもまだ兄さんたちは熱浪男って熱くなると嫌ね。
Nazuhe snorted, her face still blank.
カノン、表を探してらっしゃい。ゴーダを見つけたらすぐに戻って朝食の準備をするよう伝えなさい。
かしこまりました。
夏日姉さん、表とは限らないわよ。お父様の書斎ってことはないかしら。
なるほど。考えられんどういう話の流れかはお父さんの主催に場所を移してお父さんにも混じって
そのような汚らわしい話題を好んでお父様が書斎へ招き入れることなど考えられます。
あらそう。じゃあ仕方ないわね。源氏さんとカノン君は申し訳ないけど外を探してきてちょう。確かに兄さんなら 頭を冷やすために外を散歩しようなんて言い、たとえこんな天気でもね。私はお父様の書斎に行ってくるわ。ひょっとするとそこにいるかもしれないしね。
客人であるエヴァさんにそこまでのご足労はおかけできません。私が行って朝のご挨拶も兼ねて。
あら、じゃあお願いするわね。でも朝の挨拶を交わしてくれるかは疑わしい。夏日姉さんってお父様とは仲よろしかったかしら？
仲が良いかは分かりかねますが、後宮家の跡継ぎの妻を許されるだけの信頼を得ていると確信しています。
ならきっと返事くらいはしてくれるわね。お父様とは朝食くらいご一緒したいの。ぜひ降りてきてくださるよう説得してくれないかしら？私たちはすっかり嫌われちゃってるみたいだけど、そこまで信頼を得ている夏日姉さんの言うことなら聞いてくれそうですもの。そこまで短歌を切ってお父様を説得できず、一人信頼を得ているなんて二度と言えないかもね。
自信はありませんが、努力はします。
Lihat lagi slide terhandal gitu. That's how he responded, looking discouraged. However, knowing Kinzo's temperament, she had absolutely no confidence in her ability to bring him out. Eva was clearly mocking her, confident that Natsuhi wouldn't be able to get Kinzo to calm down. But even so, Natsuhi would lose face if she gave up, saying it was impossible and letting Eva go instead. Eva's mean-spirited and unreasonable demand made Natsuhi clench her fists slightly. When Genji realized this, he softly spoke to her over her shoulder. Menawarkan diri.
奥様、よろしければこれをお持ちください。
それは？
Genji handed Natsuhi a sparkling gold key of ornate design. It was the key to Kinzo's study. The study had an auto-lock and couldn't be unlocked as long as Kinzo forbid entrance. However, since Genji was especially trusted by Kinzo, he was allowed to carry a key to that door.
でもこの鍵を使ったら、あなたも咎めを受けるのではありませんか？
親方様は深くお休みになられている時と、それに親方様にお部屋を出ていただくよう説得するには、ぜひお使いください。
Gila, baik banget Genji.
Genji.
Until now, Natsuhi had thought of Genji as a cold servant who wouldn't do anything for her since he worked directly under Kinzo. But it looked like she would have to alter her understanding of him. She wanted to communicate her gratitude, but then Genji had already turned his back on her and was walking down to the corridor with Cannon. But as Natsuhi watched them go, the words directed at her from behind were sneering.
じゃあお父様を必ず連れてきてね。息子のかわいい嫁の言うことですもの。きっと聞いてくれるわよ。
Sialan.
私たちは客人だから、ここでのんびりくつろがせてもらうわ。
予算かえば口が過ぎるで。すまんが夏日姉さん、お父さんのことをよろしく頼むわ。
Without answering, Natsuhi forcefully spun around on her heels and quickly left the place. After all that excitement from the previous night, there was no way anyone was going to wake up early. George, Aniki, Jessica, and I were snoring loudly on the beds in the cousin's room, but Maria, who had gone straight to the bed without joining, was completely awake. As she rubbed her sleepy eyes and looked around, she was met with the loud snoring of the other three cousins. For a while, Maria had to think about what happened. After that, she realized that her mother wasn't with her and she quickly got lonely. Maria left the cousin's room, trying to head to the room that had been arranged for her and her mother. Paying no heed to the three who were sleeping soundly, she slammed the door shut. In response, Batura mumbled and rolled over in his sleep. But it wasn't enough to wake him up. Kebo, kayak siapa kayak gue. After a while, Maria returned and once again opening the door with a lively bang. When she had left the door, her face had been sleepy, but now that she was back, she looked irritated. After that, she climbed up on Batura's bed, which happened to be the closest, and started yelling and jumping on it like it was a trampoline. Oh my god. After making sure I was awake, Maria moved over to George Aniki's bed and started jumping on that too. In that manner, the three of us were all greeted with an extremely pleasant awakening.
ありがとう、マリアちゃん。僕たちは夕べが遅かったから寝坊しちゃったのを起こしてくれたんだね。でも、もう少しだけ起こし方を優しくしてくれると完璧だったかな。
ジョージ兄さんは本当に大人だよ。尊敬するぜ。
もうすぐ7時なんだな。ま、確かにもう起きてもいい頃だぜ。
Mulai Maria, kenapa Saks kamu kesal dengan Maria? Kamu tidak suka anak kecil ya Saks? Aduh. Yes.
ロ
Mamanya
ーザお
hilang.
ばさんが部屋にいなかったの？もう起きてお屋敷の方に行っちゃったのかな？いない。
Maria kept groaning ooh and looking unhappy. She didn't exactly seem lonely because her mother wasn't around. It was more like she was irritated and thrown off balance because her mother wasn't where she had expected. Suaranya bikin saya mas. Kamu kalau dibangunin sahur sama Maria bakalan bangun nggak sih? If we could just tell her where her mother was, that alone would probably calm her down. But unfortunately, we had no way of knowing where Rosa was, except that she wasn't here.
どうせ朝食に行くことになるんだし、屋敷の方に行こうぜ。
そうだな、マリア、一緒に屋敷へ行こうぜ。きっとローザおばさんもそこさ。
おお、ママはお屋敷なら行く。おお。
そうだね。お屋敷、多分親たちはもう向こうに行ってるんだよ。
Maria regained her usual composure so completely, her earlier tantrum now seemed like a lie. We got dressed, left the room and headed to the mansion. Tapi saya nggak kayak ibunya tukang nampol anaknya. Kalau kamu menghadapi Maria, akan kamu apakan, Saks? Once more, there was a knocking sound on the study door, but there was no answer. He seemed to be sleeping still, and I could not wake him. If she went back downstairs and said something like that, Eva would probably be amused and triumphant. And even putting Eva aside, it was problematic that Kinzo had stayed shut away during this entire once-a-year conference, not even coming down to greet anyone. Even the family head, no, especially the family head, couldn't fail to make an appearance. I wonder if I can convince him myself. Natsui readied herself and used the key that she had borrowed from Genji to open the door. Ding 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 ding. Even though she was prepared for the sweet stench which seemed to eat into one's brain, and as it poured out the small crack in the door, she couldn't help but grimace, thinking that he might still be sleeping. Natsuhi entered the room quietly. When she did, Kinzo was already awake and looking down out of the window.
お目覚めでしたか。おはようございます。
どうやって入ったのか。
Kinzo spoke with his back still facing her. His voice was not harsh but calm, and Natsuhi was slightly reassured. However, though he was awake, he wouldn't have ignored all that knocking if he was in a good mood. Natsuhi wasn't able to relax.
申し訳ございませんでした。源氏さんにお願いして書斎の鍵をお借りさせていただきました。
ほう、源氏がか。我が友がそれに足ると思ったならば話を聞かぬわけにもいくまい。
Gila, tumben dia considerate anjir, what the heck. Kamu kesurupan siapa, Kinjo?
して、私に何言おうか。
Ini tanda-tanda mau mati kak guys, makanya jadi considerate. Entah Saks bingung ngadepin bocil tantrum, tapi kamu pernah ngadepin Saks?
はい、もうじき朝食の準備が整いますが、ぜひお父様にもおいでいただきたく思いまして。
朝食はここで取る。いつものように運ばせるがいい。
しかしお父様、年に一度の親族会議です。せめてお顔をお見せになってください。
下に降りて、私の死後、遺産をどのように食いちぎるのかを決める議論に加われというのか。バカらしい。そのような話は私を抜きで好きに進めるがいい。そしてそれが親族会議だというなら、私がこの部屋を出るほどの価値はない。私は忙しいのだ。構うでない。
Alhamdulillah belum. Kau pernah kah? Aku pernah Saks. Tapi karena aku tidak sanggup jadi aku tinggal Saks. Jadi nyariin mamanya ke pasar. Bilang, ke pasar nanti dulu ya. Dia masih saja menangis. Jadi aku tinggal. His last words carried the thread that any further questions would not be appreciated. Itu udah lama sih, tapi kalau adekku sendiri pernah tantrum kayak. Adekku takut sih sama aku, jadi kayaknya nggak berani tantrum. Natsuhi realized that adding any further place would finally bring his wrath down upon her. She didn't look forward, facing Eve with sarcasm, but there was nothing more Natsuhi could do.
そうですか。わかりました。みんな残念がるでしょうが、そう伝えます。
Natsuhi decided to give up. Bowing silently, she tried to leave the room before Kinzo's spasmodic temper could flare up. Parah kamu tinggal ya, maaf. As she did, Kinzo spoke to her. His voice was so calm and gentle. It felt like it came from an entirely different person.
夏日、後ろ宮の家に嫁ぎ、もう随分になるな。
はい。後宮を名乗ることを許されてから、もう随分になります。
前の家が恋しくなることもあるか。
Nggak aku apa-apain, sak sumpil. Itu mungkin karena aku jarang di rumah ya. Terus jarang berinteraksi dengan mereka juga, kayak ajak main gitu. Karena mungkin gap umurnya juga kejauhan. Kan kayak lebih dari 10 tahun. Nah, sama yang terakhir tuh 15 tahun lebih. Jadi ya tidak. Terus juga aku nggak biasa ini, Saks, aku tidak biasa ngurus anak-anak, jadi ya don't know how to get along with them.
いえ、嫁ぐとは成果を捨てることです。私は後宮夏日、帰る家も懐かしむ家もすべてはこの後宮の家のみです。
She truly wasn't exaggerating. Such was the resolve she felt whenever she applied to the Ushiromiya family name to herself. And that's precisely why she was so saddened when her husband didn't treat her like an Ushiromiya, leaving her to raise both in vain.
クラウスが女で、お前がその夫であったなら。いや、それは言うまい。
Apa ngomong Kinzo? Apa pasti kamu merasa dia lebih cocok sebagai penerus? Cuma minta aja ke witch-witchmu itu untuk menukar genre mereka.
それはどういう意味ですか、お父様。
Natsuhi was shocked. If Kinzo's words just know what they seem, it would have been more than enough to make up for all she had suffered up to that point.
忘れよ。年寄りのざれ言だ。
Kinzo once again faced away from her. He had told her to forget it, but Natsuhi couldn't help feeling wrapped in her heart.
お父様、この夏日は血はつながらずともお父様の娘です。後宮家の名誉も栄光も、そしてお父様が残されたものもすべて、この夏日が必ずや守ってみせますから。
お前に片翼のわしをまとう資格はない。しかしお前の心には確かに片翼のわしが刻まれている。ならばお前は間違いなく我が血族で後宮家の栄光を引き継ぐものだ。
Irrefutable.
お前の衣服にわしがないことを嘲笑う者もいよう。しかしそれに耳を貸すことはない。心にわしを持つ者だけが真の私の血族なのだ。お前を後宮家に迎えられたことを今は光栄に思っている。
Without saying anything more, Kinzo reminded with his back to Natsuhi. However, Natsuhi couldn't help but feel something warm well up inside her that she hadn't felt since long ago, when she had been just a child. Jadi gila ini saja honor, saja big honor ya ketika seorang kakek-kakek yang tantruman bahkan ngadepin anaknya sendiri nggak mau melihat bahkan jawabnya kasar gitu. Lalu dia di recognize, diakui oleh orang tersebut. Sorry maksudnya wordingnya, lalu kakek itu mengakui seorang yang tidak relatif secara aliran darah, yang tidak ada hubungannya dengan dia. So he bowed silently to his back and left the room.
Ara, ちょうどいいタイミングだったわね。お父様の様子はどう？あんまり遅いから様子を見に来ちゃったのよ。
When Natsui left the study, she saw Eva climbing the stairs and their eyes met. Eva was smirking unpleasantly, but thinking that Natsuhi would leave dragging after failing to convince Kinzo. However, the way Natsuhi was now, such a frivolous love would not disturb her. She was not permitted to wear the family crest on her clothing, but she was permitted to wear it in her heart. Hato. So she spoke calmly, clearly, and confidently, with the dignity of the one who will protect the Ushiromiya family glory.
お父様は親族会議にはおいでにならないそうです。汚らわしい議題に関心はないと仰せです。
とかなんとか言っちゃって。お父様を説得できなかったんなら素直にそう言えばいいじゃない。
Anjing diem kamu Eva.
哀れです。お父様が嘆かれるお気持ちも分かろうというものです。
それはどういう意味よ。
Natsui did not answer. Just as Kinzo had done earlier, she sought Eva, her back, as she headed down the stairs. Eva finally realized that she was being made fun of. That something had happened to quickly bolster Natsuhi's confidence. Even so, she apparently didn't have the courage to raise Kinzo's wrath. Unable to even knock on the door, she could only click her tongue, make a motion as to scratching at it, and follow after Natsuhi.
それで兄さんたちはいたの？お父様に聞いたの？
Don't think so.
聞きそびれましたが、書斎の中にはいませんでした。お父様が夫たちの下船な話のために入室を許すこともありえませんから、下に降りて使用人たちが探してくれるのを待ちましょう。
Gila, langsung berubah, langsung lebih berwibawa anjay.
朝食は遅れますが、お茶でもいかがです、エヴァさん。
別に結構よ。
Eva couldn't hide her confusion at the complete difference in Natsuhi's attitude. She was acting so boldly, and while Eva hated to admit it, she even had a sense of dignity about her. Unable to find a fault with anything, Eva could only follow Natsuhi back to the parlor. When the two of them returned to the parlor, Hideyoshi had been joined by the 4 children and Nanjo. Genji, who had been talking with Hideyoshi, reported the current situation when he noticed that Natsuhi had returned.
主人たちはまだ見つからないのですか？
はい。申し訳ございません。
申し訳ございません。
あと、熊沢が朝食の準備に入りました。もう少し時間をいただきたいとのことです。
The clock read little past 8. It should have been the time to start breakfast. Normally, going over that time limit would be a disgrace to the host.
今、カノンが表を探しています。それから、シャノンの姿も見えません。
シャノンまで？
Oh shit.
まったく、主人は何を従えて散歩に出かけたのですか。
No, Sharon. So many people had gone missing by now. Now that the number was this large, it was starting to feel truly unpleasant, as though the people here were the only ones being left out of something interesting. At least, that seemed to reflect the feelings of the children, and Maria in particular. She was indignant, her stomach grumbling, almost as though her mother and the others had left her alone to go off and eat something delicious without her. The other children were flipping through the channels on the television, trying to find a program that might interest Maria and cheer her up again. Nanja was sitting on the sofa, gazing blissfully at the children while reading a book. It must have been a book about chess. The sound of footsteps came rushing towards them with a pitter-patter. There was only one set, who they realized before seeing who it belonged to, that it was probably Cannon, Cross, and the rest.
奥様、失礼します。
その様子では見つけられなかったようですね。
申し訳ございません。まだ。
もう十分です。ご苦労をかけました。
She didn't know where they were, but they had to be somewhere on this island. They hadn't had a thing to eat since the previous night, so their stomach must be growling about now. They'd probably come floating back to their own accord before long. By now, Natsuhi was thoroughly exasperated and started to feel that there was no reason for them to go out on their way and search.
私はお客様方にお茶のご用意をしに厨房へ行きます。
Si Kumasawa kemana ya? Ngilang juga kah?
二人とも早朝からご苦労様でした。
Natsuhi left the parlor, acting as though the release in the tension had caused a new surge in her headache. Kanon tried to call to her back, but Natsuhi left swiftly.
どうした？まだ何かあるのか？
はい。旦那様方のお姿を見つけることはできませんでしたが。その。
Kanon sounded evasive. It looked as though he didn't know where they were, but had spotted something that might be connected to their disappearance. Eva and Hideyoshi noticed this exchange of words and came over. They probably picked up on something strange in Canon's behavior.
どうしたんや、カノン君。クラウス兄さんたちは見つかったんか？
実は、バラ庭園の倉庫の様子がおかしいのです。
様子がおかしいというのはどういう意味だ？
Bentar, berarti yang hilang tuh berapa ya? Satu, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 atau 7 orang.
それが、その。
di ininya, di yang epitapnya itu, aku lupa di malam pertama tuh kalau nggak salah tumbalnya ya, tumbal. Antara 5 atau 6 orang, guys. It was
なんと説明すればいいのか。
Karan hesitated once more. His tone wasn't at all that what you would expect from this usual fearless boy. Saying this, Eva and Hideyoshi looked at each other dubiously.
どういうこと？倉庫の中に兄さんたちがいたんじゃないの？
いえ、中はこれから調べます。
Oh, dia nggak inspect langsung sebelumnya?
その鍵を取りに戻ったところなのですが、その。
ようわからんが、とにかく中を調べればいいだけの話じゃないか。その倉庫の鍵はどこにあるんや？
使用人室にあります。すぐに中を確かめましょう。
Aku nak tengok. Kanon dashed off to the servant room and returned with the key. Genji left the parlor, saying that he would go check, but then Eva and Hideyoshi followed after him. What was this something strange about the storehouse that had caused the usually fearless Kanon to hesitate? It was still pouring outside, but perhaps their curiosity overlaid something that Kanon couldn't talk about won out. While the children made a big fuss watching television, Kanon and the rest dashed over to the entrance. The Rose Garden storehouse was a place that housed various tools used to manage the garden. It was definitely not a pretty building. Because of its appearance, it had been built so that it was hidden in the corner of the Rose Garden. Kanon, Genji, Eva, and Hideyoshi came cutting across the Rose Garden holding umbrellas. They entered a small path just off the Rose Garden, which was normally off limits for those appreciating the garden and only used by those maintaining it. As they dashed down that, the storehouse came into view in front of them. Ayo buka. It was quite an old shed, and compared to the flawlessly perfect beauty of the Rose Garden, it was pretty shitty looking. It was easy to understand why it had been built in a hard-to-see place. Eva and Hideyoshi arrived at the storehouse long after Kanon and Genji.
Kanon-kun tachi wa hayai na.
Kamu sudah tua, Mak.
Washi wa shindo ga bakatsu shishou ya.
こんなところに倉庫なんか建ててたのね。何よそれ。
When Eva looked where Kanon was pointing, she was at a loss for words. Noticing this, Hideyoshi also followed Kanon's finger and was likewise too shocked to speak. The entrance to the storehouse was a kind of shutter, and there, everyone suddenly realized why Kanon had been unable to find words to describe what they now saw on the shutter, which was completely filthy from being exposed to wine and rain for so long. Stuck right on it. Oh shit. There was something that looked like a strange dark red liquid, mucus, or maybe it was some sticky paint, and in this incredibly eerie shape was drawn on the shutter with some kind of ghastly substance. The rain has caused it to drip down like fresh blood leaking from an open wound. No more beating around the bush. Some kind of mark was drawn here, with a ghastly substance that looked like a blood, in a shape that seemed to suggest something ominous. Two circles were drawn there, and inside them was a design that looked like a cross. The four ends of the cross were widely exaggerated, and it looked like some kind of crest from somewhere around Europe. And in the crack between these shapes, written closely packed together, were some unfamiliar character and possibly symbols.
なんちゅう悪趣味な落書きや。これ、あれか？悪魔の儀式とかの魔法陣いうやつとちゃうか？
It was so surprising that Hideyoshi would say that about such a ghastly shape drawn with a deep red dripping substance.
これいつ書かれたの？昨日雨が降り出す前にここに来ましたが、その時には
他の方々の目に触れる前にご覧になられたらご不快になられるだろう。
そうね、ただの倉庫小屋とはいえ、こんな気持ち悪い落書きを1秒たりとも放置したくないわ。
倉庫の中に塗料があります。応急処置でとりあえず塗り消して。
Belit aku penasaran dalamnya temukan sesuatu gitu kayak.
後日天気のいい日に改めて塗装しましょう。
Genji remembered that he had just recently seen another scribble, and that it too had been made with a strange dark red substance of the same color as this. It must have been. That's right. He had seen it on the door to Natsuhi's room. Oh yeah.
加納君、さっさとこの落書きを消して戻りましょう。たとえそうことはいえ、実家の落書きは本当に腹立たしいわ。
はい。すぐに済ませますので。
Tanon squatted in front of the shutter and unlocked it. He then lifted it up with all of his strength. A boisterous noise resounded, and the eerie shape drawn on the shutter began to get sucked in through the top as the shutter was raised. At least for the time being, that ominous drawing disappeared from their direct gaze, and they all raised a sigh of relief. Ya, kecewa nggak ada apa-apa di dalam storehouse-nya. Kukira akan ada mayat. No. Thanks to a kids program they came across, Maria was feeling much better. Butler and Jessica were poking fun at the kids show at every turn, cackling together. George was enjoying the program with Maria from her perspective. Nanjo sat on the sofa by himself, passing the time by reading quietly. They heard hurried footsteps coming from the hallway. They were the footsteps of a single person. Did that mean it wasn't a group of four that had just left? It was Genji. It was very rare for Genji to consider being out of breath a violation of a servant's virtues, to be gasping for air. He had probably come dashing back from outside the mansion. His shoulders were soaking wet, and he didn't have his usual trim appearance. When Genji noticed Nanjo looking at him, he gave a small, silent bow and quickly approached it.
Nanjo sensei, 申し訳ご、至急お越しください。
何事ですかな?
As Genji whispered something into Nanjo's ear, Nanjo went pale. He rose from the sofa, trying not to be noticed by the children, who were still engrossed by the TV. And the two of them rapidly left the parlor, muffling their footsteps. Just as they were about to exit the parlor, they came across Natsuhi, who was pushing a serving cart, loaded with a tea set. Genji whispered something into Natsuhi's ear, and Natsuhi went pale, too, in apparent shock. Then, leaving the serving cart where it was, the three of them dashed towards the entrance. George noticed them running down the rose garden through the window.
なんだろう、源氏さんと南條先生と、あれは夏日おばさんかな。
どうしたんだよ、兄貴。
何かあったのかな。ひどい慌てようだったね。
When Jessica and Maria saw that Eva, Hideyoshi and Nanjo were no longer in their seats and that the serving cart had been abandoned in this entrance to the parlor, they also realized that something was the matter.
何か事故でもあったとか？
行ってみようぜ。俺たちだけのけ者なんて面白くねえしな。
Oh shit. For some reason, what Batara said sounded extremely indiscreet. But they couldn't deny that they were a little insecure and concerned after seeing the adults run off into the rain without regards to their appearance.
行ってみようぜ。何があったか気になるぜ。
Jessica's uneasy words spoke for all of them.
おい、マリア。お前、それとも、テレビを見てるか？
マリアは、
Oh yeah, okay, bagus.
僕たちだけで行こう。
tapi berarti dia sendirian dong di
テレビを見て
sini.
待ってるんだよ。
By the time the kids made it outside, the adults were no longer inside. But Jessica seemed to have a pretty good idea where they had gone, judging by the direction they had been running. Following Jessica, we ran through the rain-soaked rose garden. The wind seemed to be suddenly get stronger. The malicious sounds of thunder began to ring out like it had the previous night. It felt like an eerie something had surrounded the island and it was trying to stop us from moving forward.
ジェシカ、この先には何があるんだ？
確か園芸道具なんかの倉庫があったはずだぜ。
そんなところに一体何があるんだろうね。
Just as Jessica had said, they began to see a storehouse in front of them. They could also see the adults there. The shutter to the storehouse was open, and several adults looked as though they were searching for something. For some reason, only Natsuhi was outside the storehouse, without even holding an umbrella. He looked like she was hanging her head, and her back was facing them. There was Genji, Nanjo, and Natsuhi, who had just left the mansion. The ones who had left earlier, Kanon, Eva, and Hideyoshi, were also there, making a small crowd of people. But there was absolutely no bustle of activity. When Natsuhi realized that the children were approaching, a terrible expression rose to her face, and she ran at them with her arms spread wide.
来てはいけません。お屋敷へ戻っていなさい。
But despite that, no. Because of that, the kids saw the scene Natsuhi was trying to keep them away from. Inside the storehouse, with its shutter wide open, a faint fluorescent light shone down, and right there was... Oh shit, my coughing! Yeah! Jessica's piercing shriek rang out. But that was just because Jessica's scream was the loudest. The same thing spilled out of Battler's and George's mouth as well. Eva spread her arms just like Natsuhi, roaring at the kids with a bone-chilling expression on her face.
Georgie! みんなを連れて屋敷に帰っていなさい。
Anjir, untung si Maria nggak ikut ya. When Natsuhi spread her arms, I thought she was trying to prevent us from advancing any further. But that wasn't why Eva was spreading her arms right now. She was trying to stop us kids from seeing that terrible scene. It was her mother's hurt, trying to protect the eyes and the hearts of us children by blocking our fear of the terrible scene by at least the weight of one of her arms.
何の冗談だってんだよ。
Apa nih?
こりゃあよ。
Siapakah? Oh shit. In manga and TV, anime and movies, I'd seen it over and over again. This was just seeing something appear in real life that I'd seen plenty of time before in some of those more sensational movies, right? That alone shouldn't... But that's it. Oh shit! It's that old bastard, isn't it? I get it. Then that's Uncle Krause? And Kirie... Oh no! Kirie-san! Kirie-rosa anjing dua! Oh my god, my... Terus ini gimana ya, goda sama si Shannon. Rigor mortis. What? Tadi dulu guys, aku mau mencari apa itu rigor mortis. Rigor mortis meaning temporary stiffening of muscle that occurs 2 to 6 hours after death, caused by chemical change. Oh. Berarti udah kaku ya mayatnya.
多分死後6時間以上は経過したのだ。損壊部位の状況を見る限り死後に破壊された可能性が高い。
Kecewa nggak diliatin, aku juga kecewa ya. Sayang sekali.
いや、めったなことは言えん。私は町医者だ。検視は専門外だ。
ちゅうことは何や。殺しただけじゃ飽き足らず、さらにこんな無体なことをしたん言うんか。悪魔や、悪魔の所業や。
I'll not see Coach Jessica in her arms and only if Coach George Aniki. So I was the only one who could approach the entrance to the storehouse. If only there had been someone there to catch me too. Oh my god, kasihan banget Betora. I wouldn't have needed to have this horrible, evil sin burned into my eyes. No, that's not it. It isn't that. There is no one here to catch me. The people who should catch me, they are right there, aren't they? Just as Jessica said, it did look like a storehouse for gardening tools. A lawnmower with extra blades, a bicycle and hammer, some carpenter's tools such as saw, filled up with potted plants and bags of fertilizer. And treated just the same, the corpse of several people had been laid to rest there. No, had been toasted there. I could tell them by their clothes. That old bastard and Kirieso, Uncle Kraus and Aunt Rosa. Beyond that, Goda-san and... Are there still more of them? How many people died? You're fucking kidding me. You can't even count them on one hand. Damn it. I didn't know whether it had been one of these gardening tools, which if used for something other than their intended purpose could definitely be wielded with a naked brutality. Or whether some horrible tool had been brought in here specifically for this. Anyway, each one of the bodies jammed in here had been given an atrocious makeup. It wasn't makeup, it was more like their face had been plowed. What is plowed? Plowed. Plowed. Wait, what? Had been plowed. Having hit the earth thrown up with a plow. Wait, what? Ditumbuk kah maksudnya? Their faces were smashed, forced into expression that normal people couldn't make even after death. Oh shit. Mungkin karena ini kali ya terlalu brutal kali ya, makanya nggak dilihatin. Tapi aku penasaran di animenya ada nggak ya? Anime atau manga atau semacamnya. I couldn't tell where the eyes or the nose were. Shit! but I could find their mouths because they were gaping wide, their gums exposed, but their front teeth were missing, and even the cheeks that should have covered all these were all torn up and laid bare. Oh, okay. Di manga diliatin. Aku nak tengok abis ini. That trendy makeup you always spend so much time on, even though you're a man, isn't doing a thing now.
Oyaji! てめえは絶対地獄行きだとは思ってたぜ。でもよ、ここまでじゃねえだろ。ここまでひでえ目に遭わされるほどの悪党じゃなかったか。綺麗さもさ、こんな男と付き合うのはやめろって言ったんだ。あんたまでそこまでの目に遭わされる理由は何もねえじゃねえかよ。
Kasihan Kiria tidak salah apa-apa, bro. Dia bahkan baru menikah dengan Rudolf. Shit, man.
顔がね、クソ
バトラさん、これ以上見てはいかん。こんな姿をお父さんもお母さんもあんたに見せたいわけがない。お父さんとお母さんのためにもこれ以上見てはいかん。
Bener bukannya dipotong pakai pemotong rumput. Anjir. So, bukan pakai ini kah kekuatan magis gitu. Manual.
死者ってのは安らかに眠る顔ってやつを拝ませてくれるんじゃねえのかよ。顔がねえんだよ。俺の親父とキリエさんの顔がねえんだよ。どういう顔して死んじまったのか、それすらもわかんねえんだよ。なんだよ俺は。親父たちのことを思い出すときはこのくちゃくちゃの化け物みてえな顔をいつも思い出せたのかよ。そいつは最高だぜ。クソ親父のニヤニヤとした顔を思い出さなくていいんだからよ。最高だぜ、最高だぜ。でもよ、キリエさんの顔くらいの生きたキリエさんは悪党じゃねえ。たまにはムカつくと思ったけどよ、ちょいとかっこいい俺の姉気分だったお人じゃねえかよ。
姉貴。
こんなのってねえよ。黒いおじさんなんかまだマシじゃねえか。顔面じゃなくて側面だぜ。少なくとも顔半分は残ってるじゃねえ。まだマシだぜ、まだマシだぜ。
Jessica filled her ears with the sound of her own screaming, trying to shut out my reckless words.
よすんだ、バタラ君。もうよすんだ。もうよす。兄貴。
Disregarding age and appearance, I fell to my knees, clinging to Aniki's waist and sobbing. It was as if I was crying on behalf of everyone there, representing the feelings of everyone there. I screamed over and over. The manga looks good, by the way. Oh my god, I'm gonna check it out after the stream, maybe. Tapi kalau aku lihat mangganya nanti aku ke spoiler dong. Aku lihat sampai ini aja deh. Aku lihat sampai mereka ditemukan deh, mayatnya ditemukan. Tidak janji.
倒れているのはクラウスおじさん、ルドルフおじさん、キリエおばさんにローザおばさん、ゴーダさんで5人。
Oh shit.
いや、
No.
6人や。
6 Oh no. No. Shannon-chan. aku kasih lihat gambar muka mereka. Kasih linknya aja gimana?
ここにもう一人おる。
The body Hideyoshi was looking down on now happened to be hidden among the shadows in that mountain range of objects in a blind spot to George, who stood by the entrance. So George couldn't tell whose body it was. So George cursed himself. He cursed the fact that his worst guess always turned out to be right.
じゃあお父さんの足元に倒れているのはシャノンなんだね。
ああ、シャノンちゃんや。
No, nangis dia. Oh my god. George fell completely silent. Anjing, aku baru ngomong tadi gimana kalau mereka habis memberikan cincin akan ada sesuatu yang terjadi malam itu. Sorry. He shook slightly, his lower lip trembling. Normally, he would have wanted to run to his beloved body, screaming and crying. However, before harshly rushing forward, baru aku mau bilang, berarti di sini George doang kayak nggak kehilangan orang terkasihnya, tapi tidak anjir. However, before harshly rushing forward, he worked to keep his composure and asked his father.
シャノンもクラウスおじさんたちと。
Oh, dia nggak mau ngeliatnya. Hideyoshi deeply understood the meaning of these words, so he couldn't give George an immediate answer. Rather, he felt that silence was the only sincere and loving response he could give George right now. When George asked if Shannon was the same, he meant to ask whether her corpse was in the same condition as the others or not. Since Hideyoshi hadn't denied it, it meant her corpse was in the same brutal state.
シャノンを見てもいいかな。
No.
いや、あかん。
どうして？だってもう二度とシャノンの顔を見られないんだよ。その最後の顔、どうして見たらいけないんだよ。
お前が最後にシャノンちゃんに会ったのは昨日か。
うん。
そうか。そのシャノンちゃんは別れ際にお前にどんな顔を見せたんや。
素敵な笑顔だったよ。
Oh my god, why you show me this? After he handed her the ring, she hesitated even though she must have already made up her mind. Then she looked bashful and ran away because she was embarrassed to let him see her face looking like that. That's the expression that was revived in Jared's mind.
そうか。ならシャノンちゃんもその笑顔をお前に残したいと願うはずや。
Hideyoshi looked down upon Shannon's body lying at his feet. Just like the other bodies, it was in such a horrible state that it would make anyone want to cover their eyes. Her head had been smashed in from the side, and no more than half of her expression remained. If the remaining blood-soaked half of her expression had been wiped clean, would that graceful smile of hers have peeked out? But only half of it. Well, shit. Without thinking, Hideyoshi slapped his hands over his eyes. How brutal. If her face was going to be crossed anyway, then if only all of it had been crossed, he may have been able to temporarily distract Jairus from his pain by making the pathetic suggestion that it was someone else wearing Shannon's clothes. But half of her face had been left untouched. It caused the body so much humiliation, while still proving beyond doubt that the body was Shannon's and no one else. How inhuman, how brutish. And there, trying his best to burn the image of the remaining half of Shannon's expression into his eyes as she lay at Hideyoshi's feet, was Kanon. Kanon was not crying. Tears had risen to his eyes, but they did not drip down. But that didn't mean he wasn't feeling as much sadness as everyone else. Losing Shannon, who had lived with him in the same orphanage, whom he had loved as a sister, must have been just the same as losing a blood relative.
ジョージ、シャノンちゃんはきっとありがとう言ってるぞ。お前に恥ずかしいところを見られとうなかったんや。きっとお前が耐えてくれたこと感謝しとるで。
わかってる。わかってるよ、父さん。わかってるよ。
George leaned against the outside wall of the storehouse, crouching down limply.
父さん、頼みがあるんだ。
なんや。
僕の代わりに見てほしいんだ。シャノンは指に指輪をつけてるかな。
指輪？ちょいと見てみる。
Hideyoshi crouched down. As he did, Kanon silently pointed to one of Shannon's hand.
ああ、あるで。
Dipakai sama Shannon.
こりゃダイヤの指輪や。クズダイヤとちゃう。なかなかの値打ちもんや。
それはどっちの手のどの指にあるのかな。
と左手の薬指や。そっか。シャノンちゃん婚約しとったんか。
Dia cece anjir. Loka. Get them, bro. Padahal harusnya hari ini si Shannon tuh bilang jawaban dia, mengutarakan jawabannya, tapi malah anjing. Aku menyesali kata-kataku sebelumnya.
ジョージ、あなたまさか。
エヴァ、シャノンちゃんは男に将来を約束されとったんや。一生を幸せにしちゃると男に言わせたんや。それが誰かは問題とちゃうで。男にそこまで言わしめて女の本懐やないか。いつこの指輪をもらったんかは知らん。誰が渡したかも知らん。だがそれでもシャノンちゃんは指輪をもらえたんや。
Just good, but I'm waiting for the witch. Kamu nungguin siapa? Kamu nungguin yang mana? Katanya ada yang ini ya, ada yang bau-bau shoujo ai, bau-bau. Si siapa sih namanya? Baron Castile sama satu lagi siapa tuh namanya? Aku lupa. Yang rambut pirang sama yang rambut gelap gitu. Itu dia dari Higurashi. udah terkait, udah terikat gitu. Terus lanjut ke sini. Shannon berpulang betul.
そしてそれを受け入れ左の薬指に通したんや。指を送った男もきっと喜んだんとちゃうか。
To most of the people there, Hideyoshi was simply disturbed by this extraordinary situation and was blurting out nonsense. However, someone who knew of George and Shannon's true relationship would understand the full meaning of those words. Ini dia ada mood ini nggak ya? Mod buat nge-enable ya, biar scene yang brutalnya ini terlihat. Ada nggak ya? Ada nggak ya? Tapi bahaya nggak sih buat YouTube?
Arigato. Dosa.
George stood up. The traces of tears still streaked his face, but his expression had returned to its usual calm one. Belum tidur juga nih gadis satu dari sebelum tengah malam pada. Oh iya. Oh iya kalong. Maaf.
行こう。バトラー君、ジェシカちゃん、これ以上僕たちがここにいると大人の邪魔になる。
そうだな。
Jika sniffed once, showing her face to her mother, who had been holding her the whole time, to let her know she was okay now. Ya benar kamu. Lucy yang mana anjir? Lucy, Umineko. Lucifer. Kayaknya nggak muncul di sini deh. Ini munculnya di answer arc mungkin. Although she still couldn't smile. Batora kept on crouching in front of his parents' bodies.
すまねえな。がっつり泣いたら落ち着いたぜ。親父の野郎。普段はクソクソ言ってる。ちょっと死んじまったくらいでピーピー泣くんじゃねえぜって。親が死んだら泣くように遺伝子すり込まれちまってたからよ。
Betora's face was still bright red from the tears, but he had at least recovered enough to fake a smile, if only a bitter one.
カノン、お前もこれ以上ここにいてはいけません。子供たちを連れてお屋敷に戻っていなさい。
Natsuhi had been standing under the rain this whole time, unable to take a step into the storehouse. Udah dulu mau prepare, semangat istirahat semuanya. Oh iya, semangat ya. Ntar di episode 3 munculnya. Oh gitu. Nice info. Realizing that she had to take on a role of responsibility now that her husband was dead. Wait, oh iya, kalau suaminya meninggal berarti yang jadi penerusnya siapa? Jessica apa diturunin ke Natsuhi atau diturunin ke Eva? Oke, tutup. She gave Kanon those orders.
はい、奥様。
Kanon rose silently and turned to face me. His face was pure white, almost as though his own heart had died along with Shannon. And there was no life in his expression. On an ordinary day, if he had been told to guide the children through the beautiful rose garden, Kanon might have led the way. But now there was no distinction between Kanon and the children. They were now just kids about the same age, suffering in the pain of losing those close to hit them. After making sure that the children were leaving, Natsuhi started giving orders to Genji.
現地すぐに警察に連絡しなさい。台風が通り過ぎるまでは来られないでしょうが、どうすればいいか指示を与えてくれるはず。
わかりました。防災用の無線機がありますので、それで連絡します。
When she heard that, Natsuhi remembered. That's right, the phones were out today, weren't they? However, they also had a radio since they couldn't necessarily rely on phones all the time while living on an isolated island. At any rate, they should start by contacting the police and receiving their instructions. Everything else could wait.
ナチョ先生、もうこの場はどうしようもありません。
残念ながら私には何もできませんな。
Kayaknya kamu 1 sampai 2 stream lagi baru kelar episode 1. Weh. Ya apa, that's a good progress. Good progress. Berarti 6 kira-kira 6 stream. Aku mikirnya malah 10 stream baru 1 episode kelar.
源氏、せめて主人たちの顔を、このような姿を晒すことは当人にとっても屈辱的でしょうか。
はい。
Genji picked up several dried up towels from inside the storehouse. When Eva stopped him with a shrill voice.
ちょっとちょっと、
apa deh?
お待ちなさいよ。ここは犯行現場なんでしょ。なら変に手を加えちゃダメよ。私たちは混乱してて現場に土足で踏み入っちゃったけど、それはきっと警察の捜査の邪魔になったわよ。
Natsuki glared at Eva offended. Objectively speaking, Eva was right. Even so, she glared at Eva as though accusing her of refusing to do those tragic corpses, which had been humiliated even after death. The simple kindness of covering their faces. However, Eva had spoken both calmly and correctly. This horrible situation definitely wasn't an accident. It was a crime. Someone had killed them. It was a murder case, so they needed to be careful to avoid disturbing the site any further. They had to do what little they could to aid the police, preserving clues that might help catch the detestable culprit.
私も警察が来るまでここは手をつけずにしておくべきです。
After that, she added,
奥様、
yeah,
いかがなさい
yeah,
ますか。
I know it. I know that there's 8 episodes in total. Nah, aku sudah memantapkan komitmenku untuk menyelesaikan series ini sampai mulutku berbusa pun akan kulanjutkan.
そうですね。わかりました。ここを閉ざしなさい。それから念のためここに別の施錠をするように。
別の施錠？
ええ、ここに来た時シャッターの鍵は閉じていました。ということはシャッターの鍵を使い犯人が施錠したという。
確かに通りや。じゃあここを開けた限り犯人の指紋が残ってるんとちゃうんか。
警察に証拠として提出する価値はあるでしょうけど。
Kenan could usually has it and he used it to unlock the shit.
多分カノン君の指紋も付着しちゃってるわよ。そしてその鍵はさっき源氏さんに手渡され、源氏さんも素手で受け取ってる。大した証拠にはなりそうにないわね。
それは不用心でした。申し訳ございません。
源氏さん。
Any other keys to this storehouse?
いいえ。
Ternyata ini seseru itu, Sen. Nah, iya. Kamu membuatku penasaran, Nebe. Iya, nanti abis ini misalkan kamu masih penasaran dengan universe-nya, enggak sih, enggak nyambung satu universe sih, tapi ada koneksinya sama Higurashi, iya sama lah, masih satu publisher.
この一つだけです。
Tapi aku nggak tahu ya seruan mana Higurashi dan Umineko. Aku tertarik sama ini karena latarnya juga sih.
Toいうことは、犯人はその鍵を使用人室から持ち出し、
So the celebrate walked out of the servant room with that key.
そして律儀に元の場所に戻したちゅうことになるな。
Hideyoshi's theory sounded plausible, but was actually very strange if you thought about it. Why would they go all the trouble returning the key, a key they stole? Oh, if you think about it even more deeply, there are some points that are even more bizarre. When a criminal hides a body, they usually try to delay the point at which it will be found, so they can use the time to escape. The six weren't necessarily killed here, but it was reasonable to assume that they were killed somewhere on this island, carried to this storehouse, and hidden to delay the discovery of the crime. And yet, the eerie magic circle scribbled on the storehouse shutter had eloquently indicated the location of the hidden corpse. Sure, it didn't explicitly mention the corpses, but 6 people had gone missing. In that situation, someone had made just such an obvious piece of graffiti and even returned the key to the shutter. Almost as though they wanted the corpse here to be discovered.
とにかく一度は犯人が開け閉めをした施錠だけでは犯人の手からもこの場所を保護する意味で施錠を新たにしたいと言っているのです。
いい案だと思います。
Tahu habis diganti mayatnya malah hilang. Ciat.
私も賛成です。
Polisinya nyari apa? Genji faced around inside the storehouse and unsealed a brand new padlock that had been inside a small box.
鍵はどうなさいますか？
私が持ちましょう。責任を持って警察に手渡します。
Natsuhi took the key to the padlock from Genji's hand. Ini aku yakin nih si Natsuhi nih karakter developmentnya bakalan mantap, yes. Dari sini aja udah kelihatan dia kayak taking the lead. Beda banget sama Natsuhi yang sebelumnya, yang kayak main hera anjir, mental illness parah. After that, they all exited and lowered the shutter. And so the corpses were once again sealed behind that shutter, which was still covered with that creepy magic circle. Genji crouched down in front of the shutter to fasten the new padlock. Shutters often have a place in front where you can attach your own lock in addition to the main lock of the shutter. This was one of those types. Kenapa kamu menggunakan emot itu? Apa ada spoiler yang kamu dapatkan tentang Natsuhi? Oke, diam Nivi. In the midst of the roar of thunder and the pouring rain, the storehouse stood there ominously. With its closed shutter still covered in a blood-like creepy substance, it swallowed up the bodies of the 6. To Natsuhi, putting the new lock on wasn't mainly to preserve the scene for the police. She might have felt like she wanted to shut that mouth up for all eternity, to prevent that eerie beast from swallowing up any more victims.
さあ、行きましょう、南條先生。源氏は急いで警察に連絡を。
戻りましたらすぐに連絡します。
The adults left the storehouse. Oh, ada yang berubah di karakter list. What you mean? Holy shit! Oh god dang it, what the fuck? Oh no, Kiriesan! Roja, kenapa Kiriesan terlihat? Fuck. Oke, terima kasih infonya Nipi. The ghastly magic circled round on the shutter kept the 6 bodies in its throat, looming eerily as the lightning occasionally light it up. Shit! It literally what happened to them, god dang it. Jam 9 kurang. All that could be heard was the sound of the rain, these voices from the kids' TV program Maria was watching. Maria dia oh my god, mamahnya guys, aku ingin melihat sekali lagi. Tapi kenapa ya ada yang setengah, ada yang full? Ini aku sejujurnya bingung deh. Ini gimana maksudnya? Holy shit. Oke guys, nampaknya buat hari ini sampai sini aja ya. Aku mau lihat mangganya. Kita lanjut lagi next time karena udah hampir 4 jam juga aku mainin ini kayak my voice. Okay, let's continue next stream. Gak tahu kapan. Harusnya minggu depan sih. Jumat mungkin aku libur dulu, gak janji tapi. Oke. Yang full tuh mukanya kebelek. Yang setengah ya bagian sampingnya yang kebelek. Susah nyari mangganya good luck. Kamu gak mau ngasih aku linknya, Nepe? Kukira kamu menawarkan gambarnya. Kamu akan berbagi linknya juga. Ya, oke, kalau gitu bye bye. Otsusenitolop. Thanks for tuning in. It's getting interesting here, okay? Let's see you again next stream. Bye bye. Agak sedikit panel aja palingan. Iya udah, ya boleh.